Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the move of What If Deku Became a Ghost? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku has been dead for who knows how long. He remembers opening his eyes to a plain room, cream-colored walls on all sides. That is, until he realized he wasn't lying on the ground, but floating in the center of the room. Of course, this freaked him out because the last thing he remembers was definitely not being able to float. Yet there he was, drifting on in a silent panic as his mind scattered for an answer but came to nothing. From what he could recall, it seemed to be nothing important. He was Izuku. His last name wasn't important, but he also knew something that really mattered. He was quirkless. So how in the fresh fuck was he hovering in the middle of the room? Finally deciding to move, Izuku went into an upright position, his feet still not touching the floor, but at least he seemed to have some control of this flight. It felt surreal as he ever so slowly inched forward, his legs completely still, yet he was moving because he willed it. As Izuku was almost at the wall, he reached out a hand to support himself against it, only to fall right through. Whoa, gasping loudly as his apparently slightly transparent body sunk into the wall only to emerge into a hallway. His tumbling stopped after he calmed down, and he stopped slowly cartwheeling in the air while he looked around the new space. 5 or 6 doors lined down the hall, and Izuku was not just in a hall but a hall with a balcony type of view letting him rest his eyes on the large building ahead. Oh my god, that's you. Confusion turned into excitement as Izuku hovered to the edge of the railing, not too close because he didn't want to tumble down. It didn't really matter, but it seemed his body still had its instinctive fear of heights. Speaking of which, why was his body floating and seemingly transparent? Was he? Did Izuku? That was his only explanation for now. He had died and had gone to UA because it was his dream? Something like that. It made kinda sense, but at the same time none at all. Why UA? Why couldn't he remember anything? What could he do beyond floating and phasing through things? Was he considered a ghost or spirit? Was there even a difference between those? How did he even die? Did Izuku have some other purpose to fool? Whoops, Izuku muttered after he broke out of his mumbling thoughts. Bad habits die hard. So now what? It was up in the air as he slowly drifted around thinking. Could he contact anybody? Could anyone see or hear him, or was he forever an observer to a world forever moving? So many questions, yet no one to answer. Might as well figure it out himself then. He floated his way off into the open air to see if he could find anyone. Izuku was probably 2 stories up because he was fairly high up as he made his way to the main building. The sun seemed to be rising, so Izuku wasn't sure if anyone would even be at the school. And that was only if it wasn't a weekend. He wasn't sure what day of the week it was. He soon found himself in the halls of UA, his dream school. Bite him, he was pretty giddy and excited as he floated at a walking speed down the halls looking for anybody. Hell, All Might teached here, how could somebody not be excited? Well, unless some villain with a grudge walked in, but no villain had ever managed that before. Other than the past event about a few months back, that USJ thing. But no one was killed, so it just proved how strong all the students were. The sound of shoes tapping along the floor made Izuku float quickly through a corner instead of going around it like any normal person, because it's so cool to not just be some useless quirkless kid anymore. He could fly. Sure, he might be dead or dreaming, but who could blame him? The shoes belonged to a teacher, it seemed, judging by their height and the way they confidently carried themselves. From behind, Izuku noted the long dark hair to not belong to a woman, but a man. He was dressed in all black with some gray or white scarf hiding his neck. Wondering who this person was, Izuku floated forward until he was right above the man, then looked at him upside down. Not feeling any blood rush to his head was so strange, but he didn't mind. From this angle, Izuku could tell the guy never slept a day in his life just by his eye bags. His eyes seemed bloodshot, but that just made Izuku question his quirk. Eyesight. What pro hero has that kind of quirk? Forgetting the man could not hear him, Izuku asked aloud, "Wait, are you Eraserhead?" Of course, Eraserhead ignored him. Izuku was a ghost after all. Pouting slightly, he moved his body to be next to the underground pro instead of hovering over him. Not knowing what to do, Izuku followed him into what appeared to be the teacher's lounge. Morning, Aizawa." A very familiar voice chirped. Izuku immediately zoomed over to the pro hero present mic. His eyes had stars in them. Besides All Might, Izuku loved present mix talk show and he tried his best to listen to every single podcast he had. The man was good at what he did. Stop judging. Izuku saw he was in more casual wear instead of his giant speakers and crazy suit, but he still had his hair up. Eraserhead or Aizawa responded only to go to some couch and pull out a yellow sleeping bag and ever so gracefully slammed his body on top. "Mood," Izuku said, making himself giggle. It was so weird being around others without the embarrassment and awkward staring. No one could tell Izuku off for being there. Not anymore. Maybe death ain't so bad? It was a rush of small yet confident thoughts that led to Izuku browsing through all the offices and rooms of the school while it slowly filled in with more students. Izuku noted he couldn't touch anything, or at least not yet. Maybe if he could concentrate he could do it? But for now, or maybe forever, it seems he could only watch along with the students as they learned about the pre-quirk world history. World War II seemed to be an annoying topic for most, but Izuku was digging it. Yes, it was a horrible time, but most of the events were still interesting to learn about. Hiroshima was awful, and thankfully the class didn't dive too deep into that rabbit hole. It was crazy how in the pre-quirk world every major superpower had nuclear weapons. Post-quirk world they got rid of them all, thankfully. Izuku just couldn't imagine a world where nukes were a casual threat. After all the classes were done, Izuku wandered back to class 1A and saw that Aizawa seemed to be the homeroom teacher. He was talking about some assignments before he got the class to quiet down to announce something. "Make sure you have everything packed for tomorrow. I don't want anyone making more than one trip into the dorms, got it?" The class begrudgingly agreed and they were off. Izuku was sort of happy knowing that the dorms he woke up in would be occupied soon, seeing as that was where he was going to relax in. Sure, UA itself was cool, but the dorms seemed better to just float off and sleep. It would be uncomfortable to sleep in a hallway, so why not the dorms? Could he sleep? Izuku didn't really feel any more tired than he had last time he could recall he was alive or awake. The fact that all this could be a dream was still sitting in his head, so he didn't push it back or anything. Shrugging to no one but himself, Izuku followed some redhead with shark teeth that made him smile even if he wasn't directing any conversation to Izuku. They were at the gates and suddenly Izuku could no longer move forward. It was like a solid wall was directly in front of him, yet the redhead kept walking forward with no barrier to stop him. Dread filled Izuku's non-existent belly as he realized he was trapped inside Yui. He was stuck here, and for what reason Izuku did not know. How could he see his mom? Mom? In all his rush into learning how to float around and phase through things, Izuku had forgotten all about her. She must be worried sick. What if he died for real? What if he had killed himself? He had thought of it before, but he was never one to act on those kinds of thoughts. Regardless, Izuku was scared. How the hell could he forget all about his mom? The only person he was really friends with? The only person who cared? Sure, it was her job as a mother, but she still cared. That was more than Izuku ever did for himself. He never cared if he was the one to take the blow, never cared if he got hit, punched, burnt. When did he get burnt? Shaking his head, Izuku drifted away from the invisible wall and made his way back to the dorms that were to soon be occupied. He phased into a random room and sat down criss-crossed in thought. He wasn't actually on the ground, he was 4 feet in the air, but what did that matter? He mumbled his thoughts into the silent room, noticing his voice didn't echo off the 4 corners. Strange. In that case, he must not have any sort of heartbeat or anything like that, because he'd once done research on rooms that catch echoes of voices, making them completely sound repellent. If he still had a heartbeat, he'd be able to hear it in the silence. Oh well, not like it really mattered, right? Izuku wondered what he was going to do now. He was dead. What do dead people do when everyone goes to sleep at night? Do they sleep too? Could he sleep? How does one pass the time without going insane? No, he should try something. Izuku floated his way back to the main building and found a desk full of papers and a bag of chips. Anyways, he concentrated directly on his hand and tried to touch or at least grab the paper that stuck out slightly. His fingers went right through, so he tried again, this time trying to imagine it in his head. Again, his fingers go through the paper with no success. Frowning a little, he keeps trying, using mind tricks and any method he could think of, but none worked. Finally frustrated, he tried one more time, this time thinking about how paper feels on his skin while he reached out. And he feels it. He quickly grabs it and holds it up. Smiling in accomplishment, Izuku throws it up into the air and quickly goes for another paper doing the same thing. Remembering the feeling of paper on skin, he easily snatches the next page and soon the desk is empty of papers. Izuku sees the bag and reaches out, remembering the thin plastic, and manages to snatch that too. He pulls it open and puts his hand in, grabbing a chip. He remembered what chips feel like on his tongue and brings it up to his mouth, wondering if this would work. To his utter surprise, the chip does in fact go into his mouth as he chews in excitement. But after he tries to swallow, the chewed-up chip falls out of his body and onto the ground in a sad pile of mush. Guess he actually had to focus on everything to actually eat something. Frowning, he let the bag go and made his way to the front of the class. A blackboard with chalk was there. What if I? Izuku picked the chalk up and started writing. He kept going until most of the board was covered in the white marks. Smiling as he looked at his handiwork, Izuku put the chalk down and made his way back to the dorms to rest his mind. Shoyuta stared in shock at the blackboard. It was covered in a message of sorts. Hello Class 1A. I'm dead but here. Weird to say, but I can't leave the campus and also guess I'll be here for a while. Thanks for having me. Smiley face. Yue's ghost. What the hell? Shoyuta needed some more goddamn coffee. He went to Nedzu's office instead and brought the mouse man to his room. It appears we have a ghost on our hands now. How very unexpected. The principal smiled as he clasped his paws together in glee. Are you sure this isn't a prank of some sort? Shoyuta knew 1A and even the jokesters wouldn't do something like this. They wouldn't be able to sneak in after school just to write something like this, so it could be true. Well, there is only one way to find out, right? Is anyone else here? They waited. Nothing. After a minute, Shoyuta went up to the blackboard and erased the message. He didn't notice the chalk floating next to him until it clicked on the board. Quickly backing up to a safer distance, he and the principal watched as the chalk started to write on the board. It was simple and quick, yet the chalk kept hovering next to the word. I don't get paid enough for this. So, Mr. Ghost, do you have a name? The principal asked. He was sitting down in his office now. He had gotten a whiteboard for the ghost to answer with. The dry erase marker wrote out the name Izuku, and the principal waited for anything else. But nothing else was written. Do you not have a surname? He prodded the invisible guest. The eraser quickly swiped the name away, and the new message made Nedzu hum in interest. I actually don't remember my last name, I'm sorry. That's unfortunate. Is it alright I call you Izuku then? Regardless of the situation, Nedzu wanted to be formal with his strange but interesting guest. A simple yes was put under the last sentence. Alright Izuku, do you have any theories as to why you're here or why you cannot physically leave? The mouse, bear, dog, rat leaned forward, supposedly where the ghost was. I don't know for sure, but it might be because I wanted to be a hero so badly. Nedzu nodded. It was a solid start. Tell me about yourself, what you look like, age, quirk, anything would be useful to know. He smiled at the empty space, waiting for a reply. I have green hair and eyes. I'm a little short for a 14-year-old. I'm a boy and I'm quirkless. Nedzu was surprised to see the word quirkless, but he held his tongue. He placed it in the back of his mind, wondering if this poor boy had been led to suicide because he was being bullied or harassed. It wasn't unheard of for the quirkless, so it was up in the air for now. So, Izuku, do you think it's possible to figure out how to leave? Or rest peacefully at all? I don't mind you here, but I'm just wondering if you can. Of course, it was not likely that this ghost could do that, seeing that he was here. Nedzu concluded he needed more information before doing anything hasty, but an educated guess never hurt anyone. I don't think I can. I don't think I have all my memories, so I don't know anything for sure. It made no sense. Why would a ghost who supposedly had a reason to remain not know its own purpose of remaining? Sure, movies often depicted this situation, but in reality it was just strange. He, of course, had several hunches as to why this was happening but remained quiet. Like he felt before, he needed more ammo for this, and knowledge just happened to be next magazine. Alright, Izuku, to be completely honest with you, I'm unsure what to do in this situation without any information. He took a more serious tone and waited for the floating marker to respond, but none came, so he continued. I think the best way to approach this is for me to gather materials up before deciding anything rash. It should take about, say, a week. I trust you won't try to harm anyone in this time? No. I'd never hurt anyone. I'm sorry if it seemed that way. Thank you, Izuku. I'm unsure if you need sleep or anything like that, but feel free to ask me or Aizawa any questions you may have. Or if you simply desire company seeing your situation. Nedzu felt like the quirkless teen could be trusted. He did admit he wanted to be a hero, an admirable goal for someone thrown the short end of the stick. I don't think I need anything actually, though company is nice. Nedzu smiled genuinely at the invisible teen. I'm so glad that you've subconsciously stuck yourself here for one reason or another. I'll admit, I love myself a good puzzle to solve. And you, Izuku, are definitely a challenge. The pen shakes slightly, as if he was moving his arm around in what Nedzu assumed was laughter. Well, thank you for having me. I won't cause any trouble, I promise. As Nedzu read the word trouble, his mind whispered something he knew was just too good. Could he get away with that? Yes, not like Aizawa could stop someone who was physically not there. From the wise words of himself, Nedzu made his decision. Actually, I think you'd be quite bored sitting around and waiting for me to gather my bearings an entire week. So, why don't you help me with a little assignment for my students? Nedzu was sure this was going to be fun, and definitely beneficial to his students in the dorms. What kind of assignment? Replied the ghost, who seemed to be into the idea already, just by how quickly he responded. Why, I'm so glad you asked. Oh, how Nedzu enjoyed a good mystery indeed. Alright class, since you all keep pestering me about it, I'll inform you why we are having dorms. Shoyuta finally got his class to settle down. Wasn't it 'cause Mineta's place got raided by some villains? Kirishima responded. Sighing, Shoyuta gave him his most deadpanned look he could muster. Yes, it happened, and he has dropped out of the hero course, blaming the school for not protecting him. Yes, technically the school was the reason the villain had decided to invade his home, but it was not the school's fault that he specifically was targeted. Any of Class 1A could have been in his situation, and yet he decided blaming the school was the best course of action. Truly a sad person he was. It had only happened a week ago, and the school was quick to counter any claims he made by telling the public it would not happen again. So here they were, Class 1A was officially a dorm class. After telling everyone so, they all started to make their ways to their assigned rooms to get set up. A text notification woke him from a short nap in the student lounge area of the dorms. Groaning, he flipped his phone from his sleeping bag and read the text from Nedzu of all people. That was never a good sign. After finishing the long text, Shoyuta just curled back up and thought, why me? Why did I decide teaching was a good job? He was told the situation, and his instructions were simple. Ignore it for as long as you can. Honestly, that's what he normally does, so it was a win for once. Oh, how wrong he was. Okay, who did it? A very unamused Kirishima said, his shirt and face dripping water onto the floor. Did what? Denki asked. Dude, don't start, was it you? He was clearly upset about getting soaked, but for once it wasn't Denki's doing. Sorry dude, wasn't me. What even happened? He was more confused than anything. Someone thought it'd be funny to put a rubber band on the sink hose. Kirishima got a hand towel and started rubbing his face. Denki laughed a bit. The thought of Kirishima getting drenched by the sink was now funny. Dude, why are you so grumpy? That's pretty funny. Denki kept laughing and Kirishima did lighten up a bit, but was still a little upset. Yeah, well, when you get a face full of water it won't be. He threw the towel onto Denki's head, making his hair a little damp. Sure, I'd probably laugh it off, dude. We'll see. Kirishima gave him a look, and Denki was not having it. Dude, I swear it wasn't me. I like to prank sometimes, sure, but I was getting my room ready still. I just left to talk to you. Kirishima gave him another look, his eyes squinting in suspicion but didn't comment. Denki laid his head back on the couch. He was chilling on to look at the ceiling. Only for a yell to make him jolt back up. What the hell was that? Someone yelled. Denki got up to investigate, and it turns out Kuda was the one who screamed. Kuda, you okay, dude? He noticed the other was shaking in fear. What happened? Kuda simply pointed down and Denki saw it. An air horn of all things was on the floor. Did someone get you, dude? Kuda nodded and Denki was super confused. 2 pranks in one day? Good. And then another scream, but this one anyone and everyone knew well. Who the fuck is ready to die? Bakugo practically screeched. Denki and Kuda looked at each other then slowly made their way to the source. Bakugo was marching down the halls and as soon as he made eye contact with Denki he charged screaming, "I was you, wasn't I?" Dun's face. "Get back here, you fucker." Denki screamed and turned to run, only to hit his face in plastic wrap on the doorway. Bakugo started cackling at Denki as he tried to get out of the sticky plastic. "So maybe it wasn't you, but I'll fucking kill whoever did this to me." Denki turned to finally notice what was off about the blonde. He wasn't blonde anymore. His hair was a bright pink, brighter than Ashiro's, and whoever managed to do that was probably going to die. Bakugo glared at Kuda, causing the poor mute to flinch back. Then he stormed off, yelling more colorful words. Just what the hell was going on? Izuku, being the kind soul he was, totally wasn't laughing his dead ass off. Nope, he was a good egg. Okay, who was he kidding? Izuku was having a blast. At first the principal's request seemed strange. He had asked for Izuku to keep his students aware of their surroundings by placing traps. And in that he basically meant to mess with the students living in the dorms to keep them on their toes? Izuku saw the logic, but at the same time it was probably just to give him something to do for the week. All he was really doing was pranking the poor teens. One of the students in particular made him feel upset. Maybe it was the way he yelled at everyone or tried to be rude, but regardless Izuku felt like he could bring some justice. The blonde was a jerk, so Izuku made sure to give him the worst of it. After his hair was successfully pink, Izuku just laughed at the teen's fury. He sure swore a lot. Fucking stupid-ass weirdos, he was grumbling as he aggressively washed his pink hair. Izuku was a little mean, but it wasn't permanent, so don't judge him. Besides, the guy was a total asshole to everyone. Izuku had only been watching the class for a few hours and he knew this. And Nedzu did provide Izuku with all his supplies anyways. After a few minutes worth of setting traps up, Izuku learned a few things. 1. It seems he can't bring objects with him through walls and stuff, and he can't make anything else invisible. 2. When holding things he can't phase his hand through the wall, meaning his hand becomes physically there. He knew that second one because while holding an air horn he floated into the next room by going through the wall, and his hand was stuck on the other side. He had to let go of the air horn to make his hand phase through the wall. Needless to say it was strange. If theoretically he didn't have any body or mass, how did his hand turn into some sort of mass? How did that even work? It was confusing, but Izuku wasn't going to complain. He had a kinda job to do. And he did it. He was pretty much done for the day, having set up traps everywhere and having most of the students catch on after they all noticed the place was basically a minefield at this point. Izuku wanted to be thorough and he made sure to get everybody at least once. Thankfully Eraserhead seemed to not care, because some students, mainly a tall kid with glasses and dark blue hair, kept reporting what was happening. But Eraserhead just shrugged it off or simply ignored it. Nedzu did say he'd tell some staff about him. Izuku had a new idea with how he was going to mess with the students of 1A. He saw his first victim, some boy with red and white hair, and went for it. Reaching his hands out, he quickly gripped the boy's shoulders then let go. Peppermint Head turned around startled, his eyes, one gray the other an icy blue, scanning for anyone, but of course, he couldn't see Izuku, so no one was behind him. He didn't seem that scared on surface level, but a shocked "oh" was all Izuku had to hear before he started giggling at the display of unease. He moved on to another person, this time a girl with horns on her head and pink skin. He gently tapped her shoulder twice and got a reaction that was a lot more. Wadash, she turned and for a second said nothing. Then she started shrieking. "WW, what the hell? Her dark eyes darted around for an answer, but none came. At least, she couldn't hear Izuku's laughter at her bug-eyed expression. Shit, this place is haunted. She ran to a room and Izuku followed curiously. She knocked furiously on the door only for a boy with the head of a bird to walk out. Ashido, what is wrong? He asked, clearly confused. Tokoyami, I think this place is haunted, and you're like, the emo guy, so you probably have something to contact the ghost with, right? Like a Ouija board or something? Ashido went from shock to some kind of excitement as she kept talking. Tokoyami, the bird guy seemed like he didn't want to be here. I do indeed have one, but are you sure it would be so wise to dash? He was cut off as Ashido ran into his room. Well, Nedzu did say to mess with their heads. Both teens quickly took the Ouija board into the main lounging area, and somehow ended up with a small crowd. Izuku didn't have many names to work with, but the ones there were Ashido, Tokoyami, the boy with an electric quirk and blonde hair, a boy with shark teeth and red hair, a girl who was invisible, and a boy with black hair and strange elbows that were probably his quirk. All of them sat in a circle as they placed their hands on the peg. Tokoyami started it off asking questions and stuff, and Izuku just kind of hovered over them. After the bird-headed boy finished, Izuku quickly placed his hand on all of theirs and moved it to spell out a word. The first words that came to mind was, I am sorry. All of them were silent. Alright, who moved it? It was the blonde kid. He looked unimpressed. Everyone responded with a not me or a head shake. Are you kidding me? Someone had to. He tried to move his hand off the peg only for Tokoyami to use his free hand to snatch his wrist. You cannot move your hand without saying goodbye, or the ghost will gain free reign upon your soul. Technically he was right, the rules to Ouija were weird, and Izuku didn't want to do anything to anyone's souls. Dude, watch, nothing is going to happen. He moved his hand again only for the weird elbow guy to quickly stop him. A Kaminari, maybe it's not the best idea. Kaminari pouted. Come on Siro, don't be a baby. Ghosts aren't real. He pried his hand free and nothing happened. Everyone slowly lifted their hands up, and Tokoyami moved the peg over to goodbye, then took his hands and crossed them on his chest. He muttered something along the lines of, at least I won't be haunted. Oh, how wrong Kaminari was. Izuku grabbed the peg before any of them could stand and moved it to spell out another sentence. JLUCK. Then he put the peg to goodbye and left it there to see everyone's reactions. Everyone other than Tokoyami was standing up screaming in fear. I'm too young to die. Ashido cried, while she clung to the blonde Kaminari. His face was priceless. A blank, oh fuck, while he just stared at the peg in pure fear. Siro was running around the lounge just repeating, nope, nope, no dash, and Kirishima was shaking Kaminari and Ashido trying to comfort them. Izuku was dead. It was so funny how easy it was to freak everybody out. No one could laugh at him for being quirkless and weak anymore. He was the one laughing and it felt wrong. Izuku stopped laughing. Maybe he'd gone too far. Realizing what he'd done, Izuku wanted to fix this. It was his fault. But how could he? He already had all of them thinking they'd try to kill them in their sleep. Crap. Izuku felt awful. How could any of his bullies like this feeling? Izuku saw that Tokoyami was still sitting by the Ouija board, and in a poor attempt to fix this he quickly started moving the peg again. SOIWONHURT. IWTHOKANT. MIBD. Tokoyami called everyone over as he read it all aloud. Okay, thanks. Siro said. Wait, so that means the dorms are actually haunted? Ashido and Kirishima seemed scared but not as bad as before. Kaminari was clearly not believing it, but all the evidence was right there. Oh my god. He muttered, slapping a hand on his forehead. Wait, what if the ghost is the one who's been pranking everybody? Kaminari said, standing up again. Everyone gave him looks. Oh come on guys. I told you I didn't do it. But they all seemed to not believe him. What the hell would a ghost gain from pranking everyone? Kirishima said. Most of them muttered agreements and Kaminari seemed to be at a loss. Izuku was just glad they weren't as scared anymore. Denki was having a bad week. At first it was because of some ghost that apparently was haunting the dorms. Only those who were there at the incident with the Ouija board actually thought it was true though. And the second thing was everyone kept blaming him for the pranks. He pranked Kirishima one time once, and suddenly he's the master at it. Every single time someone got water dumped on their head it was his fault. But Denki wasn't doing it. No one believed him at this point, and everyone kept glaring at him. Hell, Bakugo was ready to murder him at this point, but when was he never? Denki was completely fed up with it, mostly because he knew who was doing it. It just had to be the ghost. It made sense, it was haunting the dorms. Some kids kept claiming they felt a cold, shocking feeling on their shoulders in the hallways, or like someone was watching them in their rooms, while alone. But other than the watching bit, Denki got blamed for shocking everyone from afar. That's something he didn't even consider before. Don't tell anyone he was planning on using it one day. But no, it was all his fault. And when he tried to prove to the others that it was a real ghost doing this, he just made a fool of himself trying to get the Ouija board to work in front of 18 other kids. Even the ones who had been with him during the incident thought it was him doing the pranks. Everyone kept giving him the cold shoulder and it was making Denki upset that even his friends were ignoring him. Completely done with it, Denki went to his room to be alone and watch really cryptic memes to make himself feel better. It didn't help. Sighing, he jumped onto his bed and pouted. God, why am I always the scapegoat? He hissed, frustrated. He put his hands on his eyes, palms digging in slightly. It's that stupid ghost's fault. Yeah, it wasn't Denki at fault, so why? And suddenly, Denki didn't feel as alone in his room. The temperature dropped, and he could feel goosebumps on his arms. He sat up and looked around, but nothing was there. Yes, there was. Hey, you're in here, aren't you? Denki felt a little silly talking to empty space, but he wanted this fixed, so it didn't matter. No response came and Denki frowned. Come on. I keep getting blamed for pranking everybody. Can't you at least talk to me? He crossed his arms and tapped his foot. The cold shifted slightly, and suddenly his computer turned on itself. Denki stood up and walked over to see it opened up into a writing program. Then the keys started moving and words read out. I'm sorry about that, I didn't want anyone to take the blame. If anyone ever says Denki screamed, they're lying. Oh, okay? Can you just stop? He tried. The ghost typed up something then deleted it too quick for him to read. It finally settled on I can't. Why not? It's my job? I can't, I'm sorry. Wait, why? I can't go on like this. My life relies on social interaction, dude. I'm sorry, it should only be for the week. What? The entire week? No way. Denki didn't know where to make eye contact with, so he just looked at his computer chair guessing the ghost was somewhere around there. I'm sorry, I can't really help you. It's my job kinda, and at least you can talk to people. Well, gee, did the ghost just guilt trip him? Great. But Denki was dying, while that was poorly said, to talk to his friends again, and it was only Wednesday. He was not giving up to some dead guy. Listen, dude, I know you're the ghost and all, but I just want my friends to stop being mad at me for something I didn't even do. Can't you wait it out? I'll probably be making myself known later anyways. I'm sorry if it's rude to you, but I was asked to do this, so I'm going to live. He started to delete that but left it anyways, up to it. Fine. I get it, you're trying to be the nice guy and all, but come on. Denki threw his hands onto his head and messed up his hair in frustration. This was getting him nowhere. Izuku was having a small dilemma. His urge to help the poor blonde kid Kaminari was strong, but his promise to help the principal was stronger. It technically wasn't his fault the class had gone to blame Kaminari specifically, but until Friday Izuku didn't know what to really do. He was asked to mess with Class 1A and 1B, so he did. Kaminari was practically on the verge of tears at this point, and Izuku didn't really know how to respond to that. It tended to be the other way around, and other than his mom, from what he can recall, no one had ever really helped him calm down. So it's not like he had any experience with this. But he wanted to help the poor blonde somehow, so he went over to type some more. From what he did remember, his mom always hugged him and pet his hair, telling him it'd be okay. That should help, right? I'm sorry, Kaminari, would you like a hug? He left it at that because he felt like his muttering would end up on the screen otherwise. I just want to help, he said, looking at Kaminari. He finished reading and awkwardly shuffled. Sure? It was more of a question, but Izuku took it. He floated down to the blonde's level and noticed he was shorter. Though in life he was always the runt anyways. He held out his arms and went to touch the boy softly. He clearly felt the hands slowly move around him in a very awkward hug. Kaminari moved his hands to try and touch Izuku's back, but Izuku didn't notice it. And suddenly, Izuku was somehow shoved into Kaminari. Izuku woke up for the first time in a few days on the floor. Denki woke up on the floor. Wait, Wait, your name is Izuku? Yeah? You can hear me? Yeah? Both boys slowly stood up and glanced down at their hands. They were both moving them at the same time, somehow completely in sync. Denki and Izuku ran over to the first mirror they could find and held it up. Sure enough, Denki's face was there, but another face seemed to be overlapping with Denki's. It was Izuku. Both boys screamed in shock. How is this happening? Both voices said. They were still in sync it seemed, yet their thoughts were completely different. Izuku was happy that someone could actually see and hear him, and Denki was just freaking out. How is this happening? I don't know, but this is amazing. You can see me, I guess? Can you leave so I don't have a heart attack? This is getting weird, dude. Oh, sorry. And as soon as it happened, it was over. Izuku jumped out and all of Denki's thoughts were gone. His hands no longer overlapped with Denki's and Izuku was floating a foot off the ground muttering to himself about what just happened. And then Izuku noticed Denki looking at him. Like accurately looking at his eyes and following his slowly moving form. Oh my god! Denki screamed. Izuku froze and slowly floated to the floor. Wait, you can actually see me? Denki nodded dumbfounded. Izuku just smiled and felt excitement over the fact that he could actually talk to someone. Denki watched as this kid ghost with curly green hair float around in joy. He almost looked familiar, but Denki couldn't remember from where. So, why are you, here anyways? Denki asked, trying to calm down a bit from that weird, possessing thing. Oh, I can't actually leave. The ghost, now dubbed Izuku, said. His eyes were also green. What are you, like, stuck here? Like in the movies? Izuku nodded and started muttering something Denki couldn't catch. Hello. The boy shook his head as if to clear his thoughts and blushed. Note to self, ghosts can apparently do that. Mutter my thoughts a lot. Helps me think, sorry. It's fine, dude, I get it. Denki waved it off. The ghost beamed at him like he'd been handed $1 million. Cool, he chirped. I've never really had anyone to talk to other than my mom, so, just tell me if anything bothers you. Denki smiles back. At least the ghost seemed friendly. Sure, dude, I guess we can be bros if you want. Izuku sounded lonely, and Denki, being an aspiring hero, wanted to help him. Even if it was kinda creepy that he knew his name beforehand, he probably just heard it in conversation. Izuku was having the time of his life. First someone to talk to, and second a friend. Izuku never had friends from what he knew, probably because he was quirkless. Worthless. Denki snapped and Izuku noticed he was muttering again. Sorry, he said. Denki just laughed and gave another nonchalant wave. Sensei was angry, and to say Tamura was mad would be an understatement. They both agreed it was a good plan, maybe not foolproof seeing what had happened, but definitely a good plan. If only they had spent more time with their little experiment. It had worked, of course, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was they hadn't invested the time they needed, and now it was just a huge waste of fucking time. Tamura scratched his neck harder and Kurogiri finally stepped in so he wouldn't bleed on the bar. That man was a fucking freak over his dumb bar. Anyways, Tamura was pissed off another plan had gotten fucked. He waited the week for nothing to fucking happen, and Sensei just told him the maybe reason, and that just made him more pissed. What was the goddamn point of having a spy if the damn spy didn't know it? Sensei was smart, but Tamura knew his reason for their spy not showing was bullshit. That idiot probably wanted to keep their cover up and skip the week. Whatever, not like he really cared anyways. Izuku still had one more day before he was to meet up with Nedzu. He liked Kaminari Denki for he was his first friend. He was a little slow at times, but he was still fun to be around and made a lot of jokes that got Izuku to curl into a ball and float aimlessly due to all his laughing. One time he phased through the floor and saw Eraserhead sleeping in some sleeping bag that just made him laugh harder. Speaking of which, Izuku thought it would be appreciated if he made it so the teachers could see him as well. He quickly floated through Eraserhead's body in the morning and immediately Eraserhead stared at him with wide eyes. "Hi. I'm the ghost Izuku. I figured out I could do this," he said with a little jazz hands thrown in to appear more friendly. The man's gaze was scary and Izuku was already cracking under the pressure. "Jesus, next time a warning would be nice," he said in an angered tone. Izuku faltered and avoided his gaze, nodding with a small sorry. Eraserhead sighed and started walking. Izuku didn't follow, but Eraserhead grunted looking back at him and Izuku quickly made his way next to him. "Seems that meeting was going to be a day early. Nedzu, you're going to want to see this," Aizawa said as he shuffled his way into the principal's office. Nedzu looked up from his book and closed it to pay attention to his grumpy staff member. "Aizawa, what brings you here today?" He pulled a cup of tea out for the man who gave him a nod and politely sat to drink it. "Kid, might as well show him." And Nedzu felt himself shiver as something in the air moved. Oh, there was a floating child with large green eyes and curly hair in the room. He backed off from Nedzu to be next to Aizawa. "Hi. I'm the ghost Izuku, and I learned I could do this." He tried. His smile was wavy, but overall his posture screamed nervous. Nedzu gave him a warm smile. "Interesting. And just how did you figure this out?" Nedzu already had a hunch, but it never hurt to ask. While I was doing my job, the one you gave me, Kaminari Denki, got blamed for most of the traps. So I tried to tell him I would stop soon, but he kinda got upset, so I tried to comfort him. I went to hug him and suddenly we fused." Nedzu nodded. "So I jumped out of his body and now he can see me. I just put my arm through you and that seems to work too." After Izuku finished, Aizawa seemed to be done spectating. "So you already revealed yourself to some of my students. Good job." It had bite and Nedzu noticed how Izuku flinched. "I'm sorry, I got too into it." He lowered his head and surprisingly his hair followed the movement. For a ghost it was strange his hair followed the laws of physics but his body did not. "Well, that put aside, Aizawa, we were going to tell the students sooner or later regardless. This will just speed that part up. Izuku, you seem like a fine young gentleman and I've done my research. I got us a lead." The boy perked up, and Nedzu pulled a folder out from his desk. "A boy was reported missing a few weeks ago. He is 15, and has green eyes and hair." Izuku blinked a few times. The boy was registered as quirkless, and on top of that has the name Midoriya Izuku. "Honey, don't stay out too long," Izuku's mom called. Midoriya Inko was a loving mother, and Izuku was always one to follow in her footsteps. He tried his best to help others in need. He was almost 4, meaning his quirk could be here any day now. He hoped he got a cool quirk, something he could help others with. Even if he got a weaker quirk, Izuku was dead set on becoming a hero to help. He'd make sure of it. Kaken said if you have a weak quirk you can't help out, but Izuku didn't think like that. If you set your mind to it, you could do it. That's what All Might said on the news once, and it stuck with Izuku. He would be a hero even if Kaken said no. "Midoriya?" Izuku blinked a few times. Aizawa and Nedzu both look concerned but can't really do anything to help him. Izuku slaps his cheeks to focus. That must have been some memory. It didn't have many visuals, if anything it just felt like thoughts coming back into his head mixed with some sound and feelings inside his gut. But one thing did leave him confused. "Who's Kaken?" he asked. Both adults looked at him like he grew another head. "What do you mean, Midoriya?" Izuku blinked again, then finally focused enough to answer. "When you said my last name I just remembered something. I remember a name of some young boy named Kaken." Nedzu nodded. "Well, at least it seems you can recover your memories. I did find something interesting while digging through your files. Apparently a student here used to go to your old junior high. His name is Katsuki Bakugo." Izuku waited but nothing came this time. "It feels like I might know him. I'm not sure." Of course Izuku wanted to try at the very least. He felt like he lost some parts of him, but he didn't know what they were exactly. Nedzu flipped to a page in what he assumed was his file and pulled a paper out. "In other news, I contacted your family. That just happens to be one Midoriya Inko. My mom." Izuku lit up. He at least knew who that was. But he did forget her name. Yes, your mother was confused, but she will be arriving sometime this weekend. I didn't want to shock her, so she is unaware of your situation. Nedzu didn't frown. Izuku's never seen him do so, but his eyes lost their humor a bit. Aizawa made his way back into the conversation, making Izuku jump a little. It's unfortunate this happened, but until we figure out what exactly is happening, either this is some quirk or some force beyond. Izuku could hear the sarcasm miles away. We don't really know what to do with you. He finished. So it seemed both Nedzu and Aizawa were pretty sure it was a quirk making Izuku a ghost. It did make sense, ghosts weren't real. But something inside Izuku told him it wasn't someone's quirk doing this to him. He chose not to comment. So, what should I do? Really, he was at a loss for what he should be doing. The pranks were fun, sure, but overall Izuku felt sort of useless. That bothered him. Don't worry until we can arrange some sort of something. You can do whatever you find interesting. This is a hero school after all, and you being an invisible guest that can go anywhere without being restrained means you can watch the students or whatever you like. You have my full permission to do so as long as you respect my students' privacy in dorms. Nedzu concluded with a brighter smile. Are you sure? Izuku didn't really know what to say. He was being offered to observe all of these things just because. Positive. Since you say you've already made your presence known to young Kaminari, why not with all of Class 1A? You're young and it's understandable you want social time. At this, Izuku knew that the principal just wanted him to have some sort of comfort. He did voice a few times to Aizawa throughout the week how quiet it was when no one could really talk to you. By voice he meant by writing on a small notebook for the man to read. But thank you for welcoming me even though I feel like I'm invading. Izuku bowed. Nonsense, it's not like you wanted to be stuck here. The mouse, rat, bear, whatever. This concludes our meeting. Aizawa, would you be so kind as to help our guest get acquainted with the students? Aizawa nodded and slowly made his way to the door, a quiet ghost trailing behind. Why did it feel like this wasn't someone's quirk? Class, I have some news. All 18 number 19 students turned. Shinso Hitoshi was finally bumped up into Class 1A due to Shuda's own recommendation. They still needed a 20th student, but no one had shown enough promise, so it remained empty for now. We have a guest here and he's going to introduce himself, so if you could all line up. The students did as they were told, and Kaminari seemed to keep his gaze off from Shoyuta and on said guest. Seemed like the kid didn't lie about showing himself to Kaminari. The kid, Midoriya? It was weird calling a child by his first name. Smiled and Kaminari and put his hand out to phase through everyone in the line. Suddenly all the eyes were pointed at the floating kid. Before you ask, yes, Midoriya is a ghost, and no, we don't know if this is a quirk or not. And Shoyuta walked away. Of course, he stayed outside the room to listen for any detail slips. Nedzu might trust the kid, but Aizawa was still suspicious. Izuku was suddenly surrounded by students. No way, this is totally a quirk, right? Wait, are you the ghost from Tuesday night? DKU? Wait, that last one sounded familiar. What the fuck? DU, what the fuck did you do? You disappeared and left. You're Emma alone, you stupid fuck. It was that blonde boy he didn't like. His hair still had a pink hue to it, but the ashy blonde was back overall. What's a Deku? Did I know you? Saying this just seemed to make the blonde even more pissed. You stupid asshole, don't act like you don't know me. I'm fucking Bakugo Katsuki. He kept stepping forward and pushing the others back, mainly some redhead, Kirishima if he remembered correctly, and Izuku on instinct back up to a wall, shrinking down into himself a bit. He wasn't lying saying he didn't know the blonde, but the feeling of helplessness while his red eyes burned holes into his green ones was familiar. Bakugo, I seriously don't know who you are, Izuku stuttered as the blonde's anger turned into what looked like fear for a second. He seemed desperate. I'm sorry, Bakugo. I don't remember a lot actually. Izuku looked down and fiddled with his hands a bit. He might be intangible, but he still felt nervous. Obviously whatever he said was wrong because the blonde let off an explosion from his left hand, making Izuku flinch. Don't you fucking call me that? He hissed. Izuku looked up to Bakugo. His eyes were watery, but he didn't let any of the tears fall. I am sorry. Bakugo let a bigger explosion off right next to Izuku's ear that made him whimper in fear. Bakugo plead. It was Kirishima who spoke, all the other classmates were standing shocked or confused. Bakugo let out a blast next to him, a warning. Shitty hair, stay out of this. Deku, say that stupid fucking name. You never fucking call me Bakugo. Izuku was confused. If he didn't call him Bakugo, did he call him Katsuki? Wait a second. Kaken? At this the blonde seemed to let a breath go, but still looked beyond mad. So why the fuck are you lying, you useless fucking Deku? And more explosions. Izuku was super confused. If he called this guy Kaken, it would make sense that they were on friendly terms, right? But apparently not. Seeing Kaken's reaction. Floating up and over the blonde, Izuku looked at him head-on, upside down with his arms crossed over his chest. Look, I don't remember you. I'm sorry if that makes you upset, but I'm confused on a lot of things right now, and you yelling at me is getting nothing done. This made the blonde lash out and try to hit Izuku's head with a hand that had fire licking the ends of his fingers, only for it to fly through. Did you just try to hit me? What is wrong with you? I normally don't like confrontation, but if this is how you treated me, I don't know why the hell I called you Kaken. I might have let this happen or something in the past, but I'm not that Izuku anymore. Izuku was mad. He didn't know how he should react to this, or how his old self would have, but he felt anger towards the blonde but no fear. What would he try to do? Hurt him or kill him? Not like he could do that to someone who was already dead. So, Izuku was done with this jerk. He already hated him, now it was just a more solid feeling instead of awkward and not wanting to completely hate the guy to try and give him the benefit of the doubt, but no. This guy was an asshole. Izuku couldn't believe he put up with someone like this. Sure, he was quirkless, and sure he did have some hazy memories of being bullied about it, but how could he live like this? He was going to put his foot down. This guy couldn't hurt him, so why should he be scared? Sorry everyone, but just give me some time to think. Izuku waved before heading off to somewhere quiet. That place happened to be Denki's room. Izuku found it to be a good place to rant his messy thoughts in, mostly because the guy was nice and actually seemed to care that Izuku had feelings. Unlike that stupid Bakugo guy. And thinking back, the others were really rude too. They mobbed him and stuff, yelling questions, and sure yeah, if Izuku saw a ghost he'd want answers too, but he'd at least try to be kind about it. Izuku's head was like an ocean spill, oil sticking to his memories and covering the answers in his sea of lost thoughts. All he wanted was some people to talk with beyond Aizawa, Denki and Nedzu. Was that so much to ask for? Apparently seeing what happened. Really, Izuku had a lot of things to think about and remember. Midoriya Inko had been thrilled at the news. She had been called into UA just last night and it had something to do with her baby's case. She was worried, but by the sound of the principal's voice, she felt like it was going to be something good. She just wished he actually told her what was happening. She rushed down the stairs to the train station, swiping her card on the gate to get in. Inko was a proud mother on a mission, and it must have shown because people moved out of her way. After the 10-minute ride, she quickly transferred to the last line headed to the heart of the city, and leaving her only a 2-minute walk to UA campus. She was greeted by a man in all black with shaggy hair and dark eyes. He introduced himself as Aizawa and led her to the principal's office. She sat down anxiously waiting for the meeting to start. Her baby had been missing for almost a month now, and suddenly UA of all places calls? It was most definitely strange. All Inko wanted was to see her son again and help him for real this time. Not ignore the warnings she was given, thinking he would grow out of it, or he could handle it on his own. She was a mother, for goodness sakes, she needed to act like one. The man who called her, the very director of UA, was tiny and an animal, but Inko didn't mind. The world of quirks led to this being the norm, so she quietly shook his large paw and thanked him for the tea. Midoriya-san, welcome. I know you are most likely wondering what is going on, and well, I'll inform you before we show you. Inko nodded, her brow worried. Midoriya Izuku is here. But before you freak out, please listen. His situation is fairly complicated at the moment, and I must tell you to keep an open mind. Inko's eyes widened, and she couldn't help but stand up, making the chair screech in protest. My baby is here? Please, show me to him. Inko just needed to see him, it didn't matter what happened. Please, try not to be frightened with what you're about to see, Midoriya-san. Inko didn't care. But she felt shivers down her spine and turned slightly only to meet Green. Inko's son, her one and only baby boy, was there. Looking at her with tears slowly welling up in his brilliant green eyes. Inko didn't even take in what had happened before she reached out to hug her son. He reached out as well and hugged her tightly, his grip strangely cold. She noticed he kept a few inches off of her. My baby, I'm so sorry, Izuku. She stroked his hair, it was just as soft as she remembered. The curls getting caught on her now slender fingers. Mitsuki bothered her about it when Inko had stopped eating. She cried so much the first few days. She lost a fair amount of weight but had slowly started eating, so when she saw her baby boy again he wouldn't worry too much. Inko held Izuku's shoulders to get a better look at him. That's when she started to panic slightly. Her son was slightly transparent and his eyes had a strange muted whiteness in the green now that she really looked. Inko was already crying but now she was bawling. Her son was dead. Izuku. I'm so sorry. She felt cold hands on her cheeks and looked up to meet the washed-out green shine bright like they used to. It's not your fault. I'm not sure if I'm even. It could be a quirk. Inko blinked and wiped her tears away with a tissue. With a small thank you to the principal for handing her some, she was confused and so worried that she'd never see him again, so maybe this wasn't the worst thing to happen. I'm not sure, no one is, but I just woke up and I was here, he explained, his cold hands holding hers softly. The principal let the two have their moment, as Izuku tried to tell his mother he was okay, and didn't remember how or why he was like this. After Inko calmed down enough, Nedzu took it as his turn to talk. Midoriya-san, your son has seemingly been stuck here physically. He can travel around the campus and event training grounds to an extent, but he can't leave the gates or beyond specific areas. Even flying upward he is limited and can't go more than 10 kilometers away. Inko took in the new information and glanced worryingly to her floating. My baby boy can float now, son. So what you mean to say is I can't? I can't take him home. Nedzu nodded with a frown. Hey mom, it's okay. I'm still here. Izuku tried. Inko gave him a smile and ran her hand through his hair again. Izuku happily closed his eyes and enjoyed the soft touch. He didn't mention he couldn't feel any warmth or cold anymore but enjoyed the feeling regardless. Midoriya-san, I'll be giving you a special ID to allow you to enter UA during all hours weekends and school hours on weekdays. I hope until we can either figure out how to solve this issue or come to a more permanent solution, Nedzu said, sipping some warm tea. Inko glanced at Izuku again and he seemed to be okay with the idea. Inko loved her son, but she didn't know what to do about this. If this was some quirk, why hasn't it worn off yet? Was there a time limit or was it a ranged-based thing? And if it wasn't a quirk? Inko didn't want to think about that. But I just want to make sure Izuku is okay. Inko held on tightly, trying to keep her tears in check for her son's sake. He was always a shy person and he was already trying to hide his tears away from her. Izuku, my baby boy, I'm just sorry I didn't listen or try harder and now you're stuck like this. I won't fail you ever again, baby. Please come to me if you ever have any problems, do you understand? Izuku nodded as she put her hands on his cheeks. She felt him move into the touch but no warmth was given. It just made him even sadder to see her son stuck here, stuck as a ghost. Inko really hoped they could fix this. Izuku and his mom were offered some time alone in Izuku's, room. Since he could still pick things up and he did mention he liked to write, Nedzu had been kind enough to offer an empty dorm room to him until they could fix things. All he had in the room was a desk and some books. He was already writing some notes on Class 1A in his new notebook. All they really did was hug and talk. Mom was worried about him but Izuku did his best to tell her that he was okay and no one could actually hurt him now. He mentioned his memory issues and she started telling him all his funny or embarrassing childhood stories. One time when you were only 3 you got dared to moon the other class. Thankfully you didn't do it but a little girl next to you did. Izuku was blushing just thinking about that. Thank God it wasn't him. That's all he could think. Overall you've always been a very good boy, Izuku. It was only recently that you started isolating yourself. Izuku hated this. Inko was trying to get him to go to school again, but he wouldn't know, he couldn't go back. Not now. Not ever preferably. The UA entrance exam had gone and passed and all Izuku did was embarrass himself. No points. He tried to help a girl trapped under some rubble but only got her out after the time was up. Apparently if he had managed to help her in time he would have been given points, but he failed. He had failed and now his dreams were completely and utterly done. His one and only chance to enter UA was gone, he was quirkless. What did he expect? He could do fucking nothing. Maybe Bakugo had been right all those goddamn years. Maybe he was a quirkless shit stain who couldn't become a hero no matter how hard he tried. Maybe Izuku was just a quirkless deck. Izuku! He looked at his mom and blinked his eyes a bit. Honey, are you alright? Your eyes were glowing, she said while putting a hand in his hair again. Her hand didn't have any temperature to him but the feeling was good. Izuku blinked a few times again to chase away the negative memory. I just had another memory flashback thing I guess. That's been happening too. Mom nodded. Well, when I first saw you your eyes were glowing then too. And you spaced out for a second? Izuku hummed in agreement. When his memories came back he spaced out for a minute or two. The eye glowing was new though. Oh, your eyes changed? Izuku titled his head in question and his mom brought her phone out to show him. Izuku looked at his own eyes and like his mom said they had changed. Instead of a pure green they were a little washed out, but the area where his pupil was had a soft but noticeable red dot. Like a little laser beam was reflecting off of his eye. It was really tiny though, smaller than a water drop. Weird, right? Izuku asked looking back to his mom. She gave him a small smile. Honey, anything that's you is not weird. Besides, it brings out the green in your eyes. Izuku laughed softly. If anyone said he giggled he'd die right on the spot of embarrassment. After a few days of settling in, a few things had happened. First off, Izuku had confronted Bakugo. He felt upset that he'd resorted to yelling when he could just talk. Bakugo, from what he had remembered, was an angry spirit with an unbeatable drive to win. His past self's opinion was muddy and didn't make much sense. He never really hated the guy, not until after he gave up on his dreams. Izuku didn't know what had led to that yet, but he did know he wasn't doing very good. His dream to become a hero was all he seemed to have. The conversation was tame from what he could recall of the blonde. Izuku had gone over all he knew about him and the blonde just listened. It was strange for him to actually try to be understanding. But after informing him of what his perspective was, Bakugo was content? It seems UA had at least mellowed him. Fuck, okay, so you suddenly have a goddamn quirk and don't know shit? Izuku wasn't sure about the whole me being a ghost is my quirk, mostly because he still had the pinky toe and all that. But until they knew for sure, might as well call it that. Bakugo seemed fairly worried about his well-being, and seeing him float around made Bakugo anxious. Even if he didn't admit it, Izuku noticed the way his eyes held a dark sadness and lots of guilt when he did things no normal person could do. I guess. But until I either regain my memories or someone finds something, I'll just be here. Izuku said a little solemnly. It bothered him how his past emotions confused him. He didn't know why he felt something sometimes. What was his current self actually feeling? He wondered. Was he the same person anymore? Bakugo seemed to think not. But his mom said he hadn't changed a bit. It was really sending him mixed signals on the matter. Both Izuku and Bakugo had agreed to start fresh, though in Bakugo's speak it came out more of, I fucking get it, you got fucking amnesia and shit, so I'll be fucking nice, and wow, did he spit the word nice out like it would come back and drag him by the ankle into a pit. Overall it was a win for now. Izuku didn't apologize, he didn't feel that sorry for speaking his mind. Another thing that happened was Izuku telling everyone that yes, he was the one who set up all the pranks. And yes, Denki was innocent. And Denki basically sobbed thanking Izuku for saving my social life. It was a little over the top, but that was just Denki. Izuku also made friends with some of the students on their downtime, those mainly being Kirishima, Siro, and Kaminari of course. Most of the others seemed nice but kinda left him alone, either wary or unsure. For now Izuku didn't mind, Kirishima and Siro were loads of fun. They made plenty of jokes and kept calling Denki out, and that never failed to make Izuku laugh. They were treating him like a normal person, and it just made Izuku forget about all his worries about not being some past version of himself, or forgetting who he used to be. He was Izuku, and it didn't matter what once was, because he would always be him. But that was apparently all the calm before the horrible storm. It was the very next week, and everyone was fairly used to Izuku just watching them while training. It was battle training with Aizawa, and Izuku had a notebook out already, filling it with notes on everyone's strengths and weaknesses. Aizawa had noticed and had been asking to see some of them because he thought Izuku made some good points. Everything was going smoothly until it came down to Bakugo and Tokoyami's spar without the use of their quirks. They started out strong, Tokoyami clearly a little out of his game, but overall he was keeping up with Bakugo well. Izuku could tell the blonde had to remind himself not to use his quirk because his hands kept coming down in wide arcs, palms open, but he'd stop himself and change it into a fist. But before anyone could stop the fight, Bakugo let off an explosion. Izuku quickly made his way over to see if Tokoyami was alright, trying to see him or Bakugo through the thick smoke. And then Izuku fell down into the dirt face first. It took him a moment to realize how heavy everything felt. He shakily put his hands on the dirt to push himself up, only to fall back down unable to. He groaned confused, and then he finally noticed the voices. Ria? Midoriya? Izuku was rolled over onto his back and he groaned. Everything hurt, and he felt so tired. Some more voices were heard and a warm hand was put on his wrist. Then it moved to his neck, checking his pulse. Izuku felt so hungry and tired, and his head hurt like someone put a nail and punched it into his skull. And all of it faded. Gasping in surprise, Izuku floated up. All the pain and sickness was gone, and he could breathe again. He looked around with wide eyes, and everyone was staring at him. Aizawa was talking, but it took Izuku a moment to gather himself. So it is a quirk then? Shoyuda was really getting in over his head with this one. Problem child, the new name for the brat, was somehow worse than his own students. And he wasn't even legally responsible for him. Yet somehow the kid managed to worm his way into his more than chaotic schedule. And somehow the kid was growing on him. Shoyuda didn't do soft and kind-hearted. So how in the hell did this kid manage it? Shoyuda may never know. But after the incident, he rushed the confused and alive child to Recovery Girl's office to figure out what the hell just happened. Midoriya trailed behind nervously. He was muttering quietly under his breath while trailing after Shota's quick pace. They reached the room and slipped inside to the small form of Recovery Girl at her desk. Goodness, it's only the first week back. Whose fault was it this time? She said, jumping down from her chair. Well, turns out our local ghost is under the effect of a quirk. Shota began. Midoriya hovered lower to the ground, and Recovery Girl, who had already been touched by the kid, looked him in the eyes. What did it feel like? It hurt a lot. I felt like I was starving and my hands hurt too. He went on to explain. His murky green eyes still had that menacing red dot in them. The school nurse hummed. Well, my theory is that this quirk of yours doesn't require you to eat while in this form, so that would explain your hunger. But if Aizawa's quirk cancels out the effect of yours, that means you probably do have the ability to change back to normal. Midoriya nodded, his eyes lighting up at the thought, and Shoyuda had an idea. So would he be able to leave the campus if he weren't stuck like this? He saw Midoriya look over to him but ignored it for now. A mother was hurting to see her son, and Shoyuda wanted to help her as much as the kid. Well, I don't see the harm in trying, but I suggest him eating before that. You've been awake for a few weeks and you haven't had any food in that time. Probably need some water too. Shoyuda saw in the cover of his eye transparent green curls bob in response. Izuku was worried. But when wasn't he? It was a really good thing he was still alive. But did that mean he somehow got amnesia and woke up with a quirk? He'd never heard of miraculously gaining a quirk one night, and the fact that his memories were still pretty foggy made him consured. What did his past self do in order to have a quirk? Or was this all just someone else's? No, that didn't make sense. Eraserhead's quirk only worked on the quirk user directly and not a quirk's effect. Izuku would know, sue him. So what the heck did he do? If he did just get his quirk super duper late, why was it so different from his parents? Sure, Mom could make things fly, but only to her, not all around. And his dad? Well, all Mom ever said was he could breathe fire. So how would that ever equal weirdly specific ghost powers? He was at loss with this case. His current abilities appeared to be flying, phasing through things, making specific body parts tangible, and for some reason, being trapped to one specific location. He let Aizawa use his quirk on him and quickly stuffed his face with food before the hunger pangs could really set in. Aizawa's eyes twitched from overuse, and Izuku quickly told him he'd try and hold it himself. Thinking about how it felt to be in a real body again was strange. But he was doing it while stuffing his face full of bread and curry. He quickly gave a thumbs up to Aizawa and his hair floated down. Izuku had to strain his head a bit to hold on to himself and concentrate on eating at the same time. He let his legs go and started to awkwardly float upward while still eating, his head and arms leveled while his legs up to his but awkwardly hovering above the table. Aizawa blinked a few times and pulled out his eye drops. After Izuku finished his meal, he kept up his upper body to make sure he digested fully but let his arms and head turn back into transparency. It was less painful like that. Izuku wondered why his quirk hurt him while making too much of himself tangible? Another question for later, it seemed. Come on, you can still move like that, right? Aizawa asked, walking up to Izuku's table. Izuku floated upward, his torso being the only thing really there. Yeah, I can move. Izuku gave a nervous smile and he followed the pro-hero outside to UA's gates. Izuku stopped and for the first time noticed the barrier around the school that kept him stuck there. It was hard to see, but it was a very light yellow color. Aizawa didn't comment on it, so Izuku didn't think he could see it. Aizawa's eyes glue a bright red and Izuku's socked feet touched the ground again. He walked up to the barrier, which he could still see, and gently touched it. At first it seemed like nothing was there, and quickly Izuku put his hand out more, only to touch the invisible wall again. Ah no! He tried to push it down, but nothing happened. Eraserhead kept his eyes on him but moved right in front of the barrier, then passed right through. So, this must not be a part of your quirk. That's what he said to him. Izuku just wanted a friend, hell, even a really lame one. He just wanted a goddamn friend, but apparently being worthless meant you didn't deserve anything. Kid. Izuku blinked and focused on Eraserhead, whose hair was down again. His eyes back to the piercing dark brown, it almost looked black. Maybe they were. With quirk mutations you could never be sure. Nothing. I just remembered something. Aizawa said nothing but nodded instead. Izuku tried to get out one more time, as a ghost and as normal, but to no avail. Eraserhead was right, this wasn't a part of his quirk. So whose was it? Well, great, now the seemingly dead quirkless child is alive and has a quirk on top of it all. Shoyuta groaned. To his and the kid's dismay, he was still trapped in UA and Shoyuta couldn't remove it with his quirk. So that only left one possibility: someone else was using their quirk. Could it be some 2-bit villain, or maybe the League? They had gone quiet again and had harassed 1A less and less. Most likely the kid had some relation to them, let it be unwilling or tut. But Shuta's instincts kept telling him that this kid was probably way too pure for that. He'd like to say his passion for heroes was so large it took up most of his personality. Not to say the kid was shallow, he had plenty to unpack, but it just goes to show how much he likes heroes. And overall his sob story was a little strange, but his mother proved it with legal documents, and her being present was all too convincing. But still, even though the kid himself was innocent, Shoyuta didn't trust where or how he got a quirk from. What didn't help was he obviously lost memories. His own mother told Shoyuta about how he was depressed the last time she saw him and how far he'd fallen since age 15. Hell, the kid said he thought he was 14, that was 2 goddamn years off from his age. Whatever the kid forgot was probably why Shoyuta kept glancing at the floating teen always close to his side. Even when 1A left for a different class, he preferred to stick by Shoyuta. Most likely didn't want to distract the students' short attention spans. Right now Shoyuta was just mumbling to himself, still pretty pissed off that the kid couldn't even control what places he went to beyond the school campus. Said kid was staring blankly at a plant, his sharp focus not there and the red in his eyes shining brightly and growing larger day by day. At first Shoyuta didn't notice, but the more he looked the more. He was the kid's dark pupils get swallowed up by red. It was a little creepy if Shoyuta was being completely honest. It was probably his quirk side effect, but it was still strange to see him get lost in his own head for an hour only to come back like he'd just taken a nap. Maybe that's how he rested in that form? Shoyuta didn't think that was it. After coming back into focus, Midoriya would tell him he remembered something, let it be big or small. His legs were all the way inside the floor while his torso stuck out like a strange invisible bean sprout. His green hair didn't help him out much. Shoyuta glanced back to some papers he needed to finish grading and rolled his eyes seeing Ida's paper. The kid didn't spend any time off because he'd always end up with almost if not perfect grades. Not even looking it over, Shoyuta marked in red ink 100 because even if Ida got something wrong the kid would point it out for Shoyuta. After a few more graded papers he heard Midoriya gasp and turned his attention back to the ghost. "Welcome back to the land of the living." "I'm sorry, how long was I dash? A few hours maybe?" Midoriya soared over to Shuta's left and grabbed one of his many helpful notebooks. "I'm going to head back to my room, I gotta think about some things." Shoyuta nodded and lazily trailed his eyes after the retreating form of Midoriya floating away. Shoyuta was suspicious as always, and decided when he got home sometime next tomorrow, he'd do some of his own research on the green-eyed wonder child. It was later in the game but it needed to happen anyways. But before that he decided to check up on the kid. Izuku's last memory had been a hard sit-through. It started off easy enough, a simple memory about a day with his mom back when he was around 15. He and mom had been having a good time on their fall break and had decided to go to a nice restaurant to fill their stomachs after a day of shopping for clothing and whatever knickknacks that caught mom's attention. But that's when his memory went from fun to humiliating. It was his first real memory with Bakugo Katsuki in it, and Izuku's first reaction was pleasant surprise to see him there at the restaurant. His mom got up to go to the bathroom and that's when Bakugo approached him. "What's trash like you doing in here, huh?" Izuku felt his heart sink. He'd spare you the details but it ended in him asking his mother to leave for a better restaurant. They ended up going home. Izuku thought it over, felt the harsh and rude comments run down his mind like lava flowing a volcano's slope. It hurt. He knew Bakugo had bullied him. The blonde seemed upset enough and even tried his best to apologize in a weird, Bakugo-like way. But Izuku had lots of memories, most being random bully encounters, and suddenly Bakugo was the main bad guy in all of them. He remembered who his main was antagonizer and yet he still admired the guy like an idol. Almost as much as he idolized All Might himself. Speaking of which, Izuku wondered why he didn't have any memories of All Might. He spent quite a lot of time thinking about him and watching plenty of documentaries or just the news to catch new stories. Maybe he hadn't forgotten anything of him? But he'd forgotten plenty of important facts such as his own mother's face, his Bakugo Katsuki complex, and most likely the past 2 years in general. So why did he remember all the All Might stuff? Or maybe he had forgotten things and he just haven't seen a memory relating to it yet. That felt more realistic but it kept nagging Izuku now that the thought had gotten stuck up in his head. Best not to dwell on the past, and yet Izuku didn't really have one to dwell fully on anymore. That was fucking it. Tamura was at his wit's end with this fucking spy business and the league had been too quiet for his liking. It was time to plan something big again, and he knew exactly what he was going to do this time. Sensei had told him all about his own ideas and Tamura was fairly on board with it. Other than retrieving the spy, he was ready with the plan. He knew Sensei really invested a lot in that fucker, so he'd grab the guy and go, but it didn't mean they couldn't have any fun, right? Izuku was getting in. Getting into where, you might ask? Why, only the most amazingly awesome top school in all of Japan called UA High School, of course. How did Izuku achieve this amazing goal? He simply got amnesia, got a quirk, and is completely and utterly stuck on the campus. So really, what else was he going to do? He already went through all the classes anyways, just watching along taking notes when he found or heard something interesting. So Nedzu basically enrolled him. It wasn't official at all, but for the time being Izuku was a UA student and his dreams were coming true. Of course he knew it was probably just to give him something to do or maybe even keep an eye on him, but that didn't matter. What was important was he was getting a chance to not only learn how his new and strange quirk works, but if he could master it he could possibly become a hero. That alone was all Izuku needed to hear to be hooked. He was already living with everyone in the dorms, so it wasn't very hard for him to join the classes. He sat in the third row, the only empty spot where a student had withdrawn from the program after a villain attack on his home. Everyone said that he was a weird pervert and only Kaminari tried to defend him, and even then he admitted his personality wasn't the best. Speaking of Kaminari, Izuku and him were probably best friends at this point. They'd discuss stupid things and make dumb jokes together all the time when they were not in class. And because of Kaminari, Izuku was introduced to his friend group that had Ashido, Kirishima, Siro, and Shinso. Sometimes Bakugo hung around Kirishima, but other than him he'd pretty much avoid Izuku and the others. It was really fun, and Izuku had been trying to get better at holding himself while normal. His best time was about 10 minutes every half an hour now, meaning he could eat a quick snack then take a break all throughout the day. It was only 2 days after Izuku had discovered his quirk when Mom came to visit again. She didn't know about it yet. She made her way into his room with some of his old stuff that had been sitting in the house for the past month, her eyes shining playfully while unpacking a lot of All Might posters and figures. And then Izuku dropped down to his feet and his mom whipped her head to the sound of "Wait. Surprise! I got my quirk, Mom," Izuku said, quickly walking over to give her a real hug, allowing his head to rest on her shoulder to just feel her warmth. It took her a second, but then she was bawling on his own shoulder, clinging onto his plain shirt while squeezing his torso. "I need to breath dash." "Oh, sorry honey. I just can't believe it," she said, pulling away but just far enough that they could make eye contact. Her arms rested tightly on his shoulders and Izuku was happy to have them there. "Me neither really, I can only stay like this for a few minutes though. I get a headache and my hands start to hurt if I do it for too long," Izuku said, handing his mom a tissue that she took with a thank you. "Do you think you can improve the time?" Izuku nodded and smiled at Mom. "That's wonderful honey. I'm so happy you're really alive and here. I missed you so much, baby." She went back to hugging Izuku and in turn he just walked them over to his new bed the school got him. I know. I really though it wasn't a quirk that made me like that." "Well, I thought it wasn't someone else's quirk at least." Mom tilted her head and asked, "Why'd you think that, sweetie?" Her eyes focusing on his own normally colored greens, the red still there, and while normal it only seemed to brighten if anything just like the green. Izuku didn't really know how it corresponded with his quirk, but whatever it meant it looked strange. Maybe just new, so he found it strange looking in the mirror to only see a bright red looking back. "I think I just knew, like, sometimes I feel things or know things without remembering how I know them, like my past self's memories." "Oh, w. Then it clicked. Izuku knew it wasn't someone else's quirk, meaning he knew about his quirk. Holy shit, his past self knew about his quirk. What the actual heck? "Izuku? Are you alright?" Izuku looked at her with his eyes blowing. Mom, I knew. My past self must have known about my quirk. That means when I get that memory we can finally learn how I got it." In his excitement he let his focus go and his head and hands became transparent. They tended to do that the most compared to the rest of his body. Probably because they started hurting. "Are you sure?" Izuku nodded and she had a worried look but gave him a soft smile. "Well, at least we can solve that mystery when it comes back to you." Izuku laughed softly, the silence becoming comfortably while he felt his mother's hand rest on his normal back and rub up and down in a soothing way. They spent the rest of the night decorating Izuku's still fairly barren room, putting up posters and getting his comforters out even if he didn't really sleep still. It was the thought that counted, and his mom provided plenty. After they got everything set up his mom reluctantly said her goodbyes and promised to visit on Tuesday, her off day. Izuku had been at UA for 2 weeks now, his third week coming up quickly and yet too slowly, probably due to the fact that he was an actual student now. "Hey bro, since you can't leave campus, want us to grab you some ice cream?" Kirishima had asked Izuku, who was watching the news in the lobby. He turned his head to see the red spikes and Kiri's face was stuck in a questioning manner. "Sure, if that's no trouble for you." And then here came the hard part. Izuku had to shield his eyes because Kirishima's smile was always blinding. "Sweet. What's your preferred flavor?" He patted over to where Izuku was lightly hovering. "I like strawberry, but I'm in the mood for a chocolate shake." Kirishima nodded and ran out of the lobby before Izuku could realize he didn't have any money to pay him back with. Kirishima returned with Kaminari and Shiro, each of them with their own ice cream treats in hand, and Kirishima quickly passed Izuku his shake. They talked about memes, something Kaminari had to explain to Izuku, who took way too much of a liking to once he got them. You could say Izuku went from being a cinnamon roll to a cinnamon roll. Sin being how many memes he thought about in his free time. Dude, T-posing is totally valid still, Kaminari said. Shiro shook his head, tisking sarcastically. Kami, you are gonna be kicked off everywhere if you say shit like that. No one T-poses anymore, dude. Kirishima agreed with Shiro, and Izuku was kinda with Kaminari on this one. He'd seen some kids T-posing outside the other day. Fine, but like, have you seen that Johnny shit? It's all over the internet right now and I want to commit, Kaminari said, plopping his head on a hand while licking some of his cookie dough ice cream. Commit what? Mass genocide? Izuku pipped in. Kaminari gave him a look, you don't get this meme but you're too innocent to get mad at look. Imma commit death? Kirishima said, rolling his eyes while pulling his phone out to play whatever Kaminari was talking about. Turns out it was an English song with a freakishly large baby and some other things that scream drugs. Yikes, I hear Americans are being plagued with that LMAO? Shiro said. Did you just say LMAO out loud in a sentence? Kirishima asked, his face twisted in a grimace. Shiro blinked twice and shrugged, taking a big sip out of his own. After a few more hours of teenage jokes and dumb debates regarding memes and how relevant they were, everyone had had enough and made their ways to their rooms. Class was tomorrow and Izuku was about to faint, if he could like this. He was flying upside down while thinking about if he could successfully even change clothing like this. The stuff he had on were simple: socks, pants, underwear, and a white shirt. If he changed into the uniform they gave him, would it become intaggable like the clothing he had on already? He turned back to normal and quickly put everything on and let go of his concentration again. Yep, the uniform was now transparent, just like his other outfit. Which was weird considering he didn't make anything he picked up like that, so why only clothing? Not deciding to question the strange logic of his stranger quirk, he changed out of the uniform and hung it up again, changing into some all-might shirt his mom had left along with all his decorations. Another thing he noticed is that he didn't even need to become human to change the clothing. He'd put it on and suddenly it's transparent. Really, that was just plain weird. He'd put it in his notebooks later for sure, but right now he wanted to relax. He still couldn't sleep, not as a ghost anyways. And because he couldn't hold his normal self long enough to fall asleep, he was stuck awake all night still. That was okay, he could still rest his mind in other ways. He crossed his legs in mid-air, floating just above his bed while he stared at the only blank wall in his room. He figured passing time by remembering wasn't too hard, and sometimes he could trigger his memories. Other times they came at random, like the other day with Eraserhead. He didn't really feel anything coming to him, so it'd probably be a long night. He could still waste plenty of time by starting at the waltz. He'd watch YouTube or something, but he didn't want to wake anyone up, and it's not like he could wear headphones for very long. His head would hurt. Even if it was just his head tangible, it'd start to ache. So he just practiced keeping just his body tangible, leaving his hands and head ghostly. It increased his time even without his head and hands. Just keeping it up got him more time, it seemed. His measly 10 minutes became almost an hour in no time, and the head and hand aches were delayed until his time was up, so every night he'd practice. He just wanted to be normal again at this point, to eat, sleep, and dream like he used to. He never had anyone to tell other than Mom about his dreams. They were always fuzzy visually, but he remembered exactly what was said and what happened perfectly. It had been another long night, but that way okay. His time was up a few more minutes, and that's what counted. At this rate, he'd be perfectly normal for an entire school day next week. That thought only made him more determined, and for the beginning of class he kept himself normal for the entire period and had a break between the first to the second. That's when he felt his hands pulse and quickly slipped back into a safe, intangible form. It was the end of the day and they were all training for internships that were coming up in about 2 weeks. Izuku was going to be training under Aizawa, due to convenience and the fact he still had some catching up to do in some other classes. Apparently Shinso was also going to be training with them, so that was something to look forward to for sure. Izuku hadn't really talked to him, but he seemed similar to Todoroki, cold and cut off from most of the class like he didn't care for friends. Sure, they were here to be heroes, but heroes like Aizawa had made friends from his high school, so why couldn't he? Either way, Izuku wanted to become friends with him. From what he'd heard, Shinso was angry because his quirk wasn't seen as superheroic. Most of the class didn't mind him, but they still felt wary around him with his dark mood. It was a two-way street with miscommunication, and Izuku wanted to help him. So, while sitting alone in his room practicing yet again, Izuku devised a plan for a way to do that before the internship. Shoyuta watched as his newest addition laughing with the other problem children in his class, except Bakugo. All of them seemingly old friends who just met up after oh so long. He was glad the class didn't alienate another new addition, Shinso Hitoshi being his second newest student. Hopefully Midoriya could break the ice with him while they were playing catch-up with him in a few weeks. Hell, the kid would probably have the loner around his pinky by the end of the week. But he was smart enough to not say anything. Midoriya was the type to literally befriend people to death, just like a certain blonde pro-hero he'd love to loathe but in reality, enjoyed. But Midoriya was less intense, and that just made him even better at it. Shoyuta was confident the kid's real quirk was some kind of friend magnet. He could probably befriend Todoroki Shudo, the class's quiet kid. Setting his thoughts aside, he got back to the lesson plan after the short break was up. Denki was glad he and Midoriya Izuku, the local ghost, were friends. For starters, he was fun, always making dumb jokes with him and the gang. Then there was the fact that he was like really smart. Anything to do with heroes, and Midoriya almost always knew the answer, but he was pretty good at other things as well. Beyond being fun and smart, Midoriya was the kind of guy that'd stick with you. If you were ever upset or sad, he'd be the one to go to. Denki didn't like to admit it, but other than maybe Kirishima, he didn't have anyone to really do that with. He was seen as the dumb blonde as always, and he did like making maybe one-to-many jokes. But that didn't mean he was only a dumb blonde, right? And that's how all his stupid insecurities started. It was stupid, and he could be cooler if he'd just let it go. But no, he was hesitant to really do anything at this point. If he changed, would his friends leave? Would they care? Denki didn't know. And that's where Midoriya came in. Literally. Hey Denki. Guess what I found? His words died on his tongue when he saw Denki crying over his desk. Hey, you okay? God, Midoriya was a great friend. Nah, I'm okay, man. Just some teenage angst and some insecure thoughts is all. Denki sniffled and wiped his tears away with his hands. Midoriya was right in front of him now, Denki's swivel chair facing away from his desk to look at the ghost, who changed human to probably practice holding his form again. Boy. Well, you may think that's fine, but if you want to talk about it, I'm all ears. He smiled, and Denki gave a sad chuckle but did smile a little. Thanks, Mido. Izuku is fine, you know. I call you Denki, he said with a head tilt. You sure? 100%. He gave a cheeky thumbs up with a dumb smile. Who? Izuku. God, that's kinda weird. Denki laughed again. What? No, it's not? It's just my name. Mido Izuku insisted. No, not you. I mean, I don't even call my classmates by their first names other than Tsu, who literally everyone calls her by her first name. And from there, he and Izuku went on to debate a few things. From memes to what guy would ask a girl out first in class, they just talked, and Denki slowly let his troubles fade away with a big grin on his face. Izuku had started training his quirk. He had 2 weeks before his internship, and he wanted to show his progress. So, instead of focusing on other people's quirks, Izuku spent all his analysis time on his newly found quirk. He had a few tests in mind, so he started off with the easiest, endurance. He grabbed a stopwatch and clicked it on, then spent as long as he could while normal. He lasted a fairly long time, having spent most of the school day normally instead of floating and transparent. He finally felt the familiar but dulling pang of pain from his hands and the headache, which he figured would always be just as strong. Stopping the time while he slipped back, he noted this must have been his longest time yet. The timer said 4 hours and 45 minutes. He could get even better. But with endurance out of the way, Izuku went on to more interesting and new ideas, the next test in mind being his speed. Not while human, but how fast he could fly around as a ghost and if his flying had a limit at all. He figured while a ghost his body lacked mass and was simply made of light, meaning if he tried he could hypothetically go as fast if not close to the speed of light. Of course, he'd never tested it out so he couldn't say so for sure. On a free period, Izuku went out to test his speed in a large field UA had outside behind the main building. He knew it might be dangerous, but he needed to be sure if he could go any faster than the normal walking pace he used while flying. He put a marker about a mile away from his starting point and set the stopwatch to start in 3 seconds so he could get himself ready. It would beep once he passed the scene on the other marker. UA was oh so kind enough to provide him with their nice equipment. He made sure to test if the thing could see him and yes, it did beep when he passed it. Izuku took a starting position similar to a runner's, but it was a foot in the air. He focused in on the marker, ready to go for it. And he flew. And in a blur of colors Izuku was already there. The marker beeped and he stopped so quick if he were normal he'd have a broken neck. But gravity doesn't apply when you were only light. But the in-between was an experience. For Izuku, it felt like a vortex of streaming lights were flowing all around for an entirety. Everything was so slow and he was just simply standing still, but he wasn't, he was the one moving and everything else was still because wow he was going so fast his mind was having some trouble comprehending. And then it all ended. After blinking out of his daze, he checked the time only to blink again and rub his eyes. No way. Welp, Izuku had been right about one thing. He was super close to the speed of light like this. Light speed was about 670,616,629 miles per hour, meaning it could go around the Earth about 7.5 times in 1 second. The clock said it took him 1.8 seconds to make it from a mile away. To the naked eye that might look like teleportation. But before he could really celebrate, Izuku threw up. He wasn't even human at the second yet his body made him throw up his lunch all onto the ground. So maybe traveling near light speed wasn't the healthiest thing to do. Well, until he could either get better at doing it to where he didn't puke, he wasn't going to try that again. But he marked his speed down as ridiculously fast. Next up was how much weight could he pick up? It sounded dumb, but if he was a ghost that lacked his own mass and muscle, was he able to lift or push more weight than a normal person? It would make sense if he could, but at the same time if he had to make his hands have mass to hold things, would that mean he could only lift things he normally could? Whatever the answer, he was determined to try. He used his desk for the test. He tried to pick it up normally and to his surprise, his noodle arms made the desk lift up about an inch off the ground before he dropped it tired. He waited 10 minutes before trying again to make sure he wasn't tired. At first when he grabbed the desk it didn't seem like it'd be any different, but when he lifted it was easier than before, but he still felt his hands strain so he let go. It seemed both his theories were somewhat correct. While he could pick up larger things with less difficulty, he still could strain himself doing it. Well, this one could still be helpful for the future, so he put it in the back of his head. After the full day of tests, Izuku made sure to write down the results and some new ideas and theories into his newest notebook that had Eraserhead's color scheme. He was a really cool hero and Izuku never had any merch of him because he was underground. But he could still test one more thing, couldn't he? That's it? Alright, I'll be your lab rat Midoriya, Kirishima said with a soft smile. While Izuku didn't think the test was too outlandish, it was still a 50-50 chance it would work. Izuku, as a human, went over and picked Kirishima up by his torso, struggling quite a bit to get the bulker teen up in the air. He held him for a few seconds before putting him down and taking a 5-minute breather. He let himself go and went ghost to try it again. This time, instead of when he held the desk and his arms strained against it, he lifted Kirishima pretty easily and could even fly around holding him up with a much stronger grasp. Whoa, this is pretty cool dude, but could you put me down? Izuku squealed in embarrassment after realizing he'd been holding Kirishima up in the air for a few minutes and quickly placed him back down. Well, I can't pick up inanimate objects as well as animate ones? Or maybe since I could hold your torso I strain myself less? Izuku muttered and waved Kirishima goodbye. Instead of being a normal person, he simply went through all the walls until he was in his own room, not paying attention to anyone he passed by, too focused on his own ideas. He spent a few hours getting all his thoughts on paper. He didn't want to miss anything, so he kept going, his hands normal while his body floating aimlessly like usual. Then he got a knock on his door. He hovered over and opened it to see a scruffy Aizawa looking down at him. Izuku liked being human around everyone unless he needed a break. "Mr. Aizawa?" Izuku asked, a little confused. Hopefully he wasn't in any trouble. His new homeroom teacher looked inside his room for a second, then looked back to Izuku, his eyes conveying an easy question. Izuku slid out of the way and Aizawa slipped into his room without saying a word, and Izuku followed behind him quietly. He sat down on Izuku's bed, awkwardly making room for Izuku to sit down next to him. Izuku was nervous, but now that they were settled he was feeling less worried. "Midoriya, I just wanted to make sure you're okay. I know everything is moving quickly and you do seem to be happy joining the hero course, but I want to hear directly from you about how you feel." "Oh, I think it's great. Not about the course, about everything." "Oh." Izuku thought for a moment, his index finger and thumb playing with a dark curl by his ear. "Well, I haven't really had much time to sit down and think about how I feel about getting my quirk 11 years late. I don't know really, but right now? I'm happy right now. As cliché as it sounds, I've always wanted to be a hero even before I was 4, and the doctors told me I had no chance because I had an extra joint in my foot. It wasn't fair really, but that's just life, right?" Izuku shuffled a little. He'd never talked about how being quirkless felt before, not even with his mom. "Well, even if you aren't fully aware of how you got this quirk, at least you're using it in a positive way. I was worried you'd be the type to seek revenge, especially with your history with one of my students." Izuku looked down, somewhat ashamed. Maybe he had wanted some revenge on Bakugo? "But now that I know you, I know that's not true." Izuku looked back up. Aizawa didn't smile, not really, but his eyes gave away his inner thoughts. That just made Izuku beam. The very next day Izuku's time was up at 5 hours. He was happy he was getting somewhere, even if it was slower than he wanted. Eventually he'd have enough time to be normal as long as he wished. While he did still get hand pain, it was nowhere near as bad as it once was, and it seemed to be fading away anyways. But the headache, when it did hit him, was ever present and never seemed to dissipate as much. It was frustrating, and he hasn't mentioned it to anyone yet, something he should do, but his reckless nature kept telling him it was fine. But after another day full of classes and fun, Izuku was content with his strange new position in UA, even if he had to physically get stuck to the campus to be noticed. But that was all before the moon had risen high into the starless sky, and Izuku remembered. It was so cold inside his room, but it was a safe place. Safe from the ones outside. The men outside were not safe. They took from him and made him hurt. Whenever the door opened, it meant they'd try to get him to listen again, but he was not willing to do it. Yes, it had only been a day, maybe a few, but they kept going and going even when his head hurt and his hands burned. Whatever he did, he'd still end up forced to do their bidding. He might as well go along with it. He was forgetting everything as time went on in this room. He forgot his reasons for being here. He forgot the names of the people outside. He forgot what they wanted from him even after they told him over and over. He got a gift, and in return he's losing himself because of it. Hell, he forgot his name. But they said different things last he heard them. Something was going to fix Jim for good, they said. He'd be complete this time, and his mind would be somewhat functional. He'd do his job, then escape into the stars, to never touch the earth again. His need to breathe not real like this. His mind would wander aimlessly and he'd be okay for once. No more quirks, no more heroes, no more anything. But that was just the ghost kid's dream. It really did hurt to remember that. He couldn't recall who held him hostage or even why, but he knew suddenly he wasn't as innocent as he once thought. He wanted this power and he got it. Closing his eyes tight, Izuku hugged himself into a lull and shortly-lived nap. He didn't sob loudly like he used to as a kid. Those nights were long gone. Now he muffled himself, biting his teeth into his lip as if not to wake the other teens in the dorms. But Izuku knew that's not why he did it. He did it out of fear that deathly cold hands would grab his face and he'd stop existing again. But no matter what, he'd come back over and over and over. Even when he screamed for it all to end, it'd never stop until he'd forgotten why he had been destroyed in the first place, and his tears would stop pouring over the edge of his eyelids. It was hard remembering, but it was so easy to forget. "Hurry up, Deku," Kaken said. His short legs tried their best to keep up with the other boy, but he was always a foot behind. Using tiny hands, he grabbed at rocks to help himself up the small slope next to the creek Kakin loved to play heroes and villains by. Today Kakin's other friends were busy and his mom made sure Izuku got to play with Kakin. Sometimes Kakin would be mad about it, but today he seemed okay. Maybe it's because his friends weren't there to judge. Izuku knew Kakin didn't want to hang out with some quirkless person, but his mom said to be nice, and Izuku really thinks Kakin will change and accept him. That's what the teachers always said, right? Accepting those who are different is totally normal, and Izuku was just different. That was all. But today was a day Izuku had first started to change himself. After making it up the slope, he trotted up to Kakin, who was standing at the edge of the hill. Mom always told him not to do that because he might fall off. Quickly reaching out for his shirt, Izuku grabbed a small handful of fabric and pulled lightly on Kakin. "Kakin, you shouldn't." But that's when his friend glared at him, and suddenly he tripped. His arms swung wildly for something to catch himself on, anything but. All he had was Kakin's shirt. His friend made no move to catch him, but Izuku saw the fear in his eyes when he kept falling down the hill. It hurt a lot, but most of the fall Izuku had been passed out. He stirred at the bottom of the hill, his head pounding and his vision blurry. His mom told him if he ever hit his head too hard he could get a concussion now. Just thinking a lot hurt him, and he tried to sit up, but he kept feeling the scratches on his arms and hissing in pain. Kakin, where was he? Izuku managed to tilt his head up enough to see his friend was gone from sight. Maybe Kakin went to go get help? Izuku didn't know how long he'd been sitting there, but he hoped Kakin would come with help soon. His head really hurt and his eyes were already watering, a sharp sob of pain finally breaking the dam. He sat there for 40 minutes. Finally, he heard voices and tried to call for help, for his mom, for anyone really. The first thing he saw was a stranger's head pop up from the top of the hill looking down at him. They quickly rushed over and hushed soft words saying they'd help him as they picked his broken body up and rushed him to the parking lot. He did end up with a concussion but suffered no memory loss and had minor scratches and bumps. He learned later at home a week after he fell that Kakin had ran home instead of calling for help, and had waited until his parents came home from a shopping trip to tell them. Why did he wait so long? Izuku tried to ask him once, but he never got an answer. All he could ever do was guess. Not one but two stolen things. They were his now, but he really had no idea how to handle that concept. Two were gone and now it was his. It fucking sucked. The man on TV was all bright smiles, his eyes darting quickly at the cameraman to make sure he had his focus just on him. That's all he actually wanted out of this, not a simple, "I saved the day. Thank you for all the support," like All Might or other humble heroes would. No, this man made sure to draw out the battle, to give a show to the public. Then at the last second come swooping in full power like some fabled vigilantine and save the day. He could have finished the fight in 2 minutes flat. Izuku knew he always knew. But why was he so greedy then? All the pro seemed to want was attention. Look at me, not a smile you could depend on in your hours of need, an actor's smile. This was his stage and this was his show. But it wasn't. It never was and could never be. This was real, and people got hurt when you were only pretending. He knew much too well how playing hero hurt others. He had been a victim in multiple accounts as a young child. Mom watched from the other room, her eyes soft and watery again. It made Izuku grit his teeth and want to leave the room. Even if All Might, even if he didn't believe in him, that still didn't fully destroy him. No, what had gotten to him was his own flesh and blood. His own mother pitied him. He felt like Bakugo just thinking about it. He ignored her worried looks as he attended school less and less to go on long walks just trying to find a direction, a sigh. He ignored her when she cries at night, sniffling at the thought of losing her son forever. Maybe Bakugo didn't think he was important enough to worry about. Maybe that's why he let him cry in a ditch all alone that day. But he would never know. How could he? He never got to ask. It was late again, his walk was really long, and well, you guessed it, it was another school night. He was so tired of all the shit the world kept throwing on him. All of the bad cards were handed into his deck right off the bat, and they only got worse with time. He was in a strange part of town, he should probably head back home. His phone kept ringing with texts but he made sure not to check any, the guilt would rear its ugly-ass head and force him to head back. Suddenly, Izuku was in front of a man. A song was playing but he wasn't listening really. He tapped his finger on the desk to the beat, his mind hazy and full of depressing thoughts as usual. What would he become? He put all his eggs into one basket and suddenly some older and much bigger kid snatched it out of his too small hands. He wasn't enough, he wasn't strong enough to hold on to it. That's probably worse than losing his dreams, he just wasn't strong enough to have any in the first place. All Might said so, his mom said so, Bakugo said so. Hear something enough and suddenly it's true, right? That made him think of an old childhood book about a bear who was mistaken as a human so much he believed he was a man. Izuku felt like that, an aspiring hero who kept getting called unworthy lost hope and suddenly was truly unworthy. He was willing to go miles to reach his goal. Why couldn't people see past his biological flaw? Why did a fucking quirk dictate his entire life story? There had been plenty of heroes with dumb or downright useless quirks in terms of combat, so why the fuck couldn't he? He screamed. Izuku was floating out to one of the battleground cities. He was crying and he needed a minute. He didn't notice but his pupils were almost completely red. He phased into a random building and curled into a ball. His hands kept wiping tears away but more came to quickly replace them. So much had come back, most of his childhood was back, the bullying and the sorrow. He knew why Bakugo had been so upset. He thought it was all his fault, didn't he? That one time after school, the worst damn day of his life by far. Take a swan dive off the roof. One comment could have led him to do it. The only reason he didn't was because of Bakugo. Not that he'd ever know. The past was really jarring and Izuku was trying his best to process it all at once. He sat there in the building all alone for a while. He stopped crying eventually but his thoughts were spiraling downward in a catastrophic mess. He shouldn't be a student here, he shouldn't be anything. Izuku hated heroes with a passion. Other than a select few, heroes who he once saw as perfect were suddenly flawed to hell and back. His perfect little world had been shattered, so of course all the blatant flaws were scary and foreign in a hero. But Izuku wasn't a villain, that much he still felt like he was missing a piece to the puzzle but for now this was a lot to think about. How would he bring this up to anyone? Denki would be a good start, he hasn't talked to anyone about his past except his mom and even then it was vague or happy memories. Suddenly, all the sad or bittersweet smiles his mother now gave him made a lot more scene. She missed him, the real him being happy and not caring what others said. Even if she feared him hurting or failing she missed her son's dream just as much as he did. And he was crying again. Oops. He knew he was a big crybaby but wow. He should probably work on that. Oh Izuku. Don't change yourself honey. Crying just shows how kind-hearted you really are. I bet All Might cries plenty. But All Might never gets scrapes on in his knees. Bah. You'll see when you're older sweetheart. I love you and I hope you never change. She kissed his bandaged knee and got a soft giggle out of her son. Okay mommy. Maybe he could cry a little. Do you know where Midoriya is? Aizawa asked. No. He isn't in his room, I already checked. Denki said, taking another healthy bite out of his waffle. If you see him tell him I'm in the teacher's lounge, I'd like to have a word with him. He watched the scruffy teacher head off. It was strange, Izuku was really smart and totally the nerd type, so why wasn't he in the dorms? Who knew what part of campus he floated off to? His rambling tangents led the ghost boy into some strange places before, one time into the girls' from by accident. Lots of apologizes later and he was in Denki's room for the rest of the day. That always seemed like his friend's go-to for comfort. That always made Denki proud, he was this kid's first friend here. He was trusted enough to be considered safe in someone's book. If that didn't sound like helping hero, Denki didn't know what did. It wasn't all about that, of course. He loved Izuku like a bro the 3 weeks they'd known each other. Sometimes you knew a best friend the first day, sometimes the first few months. But Denki could tell that he and Izuku would be great friends. If only he could leave campus, then they could really go bond over some arcade games or food. But unless they could change the quirk being used on him or find the user, there was no way for that to happen. Denki sighed. He took another bite of his waffle only to choke when Izuku's curly green hair phased right through his fork and hand. Jesus! Dude, stop doing that. Denki gasped, holding his waffle plate up protectively. He laughed at Denki's expense, then shifted to normal, but landing on the chair next to Denki's on the island table. Sorry, I just saw my chance and had to take it. He smiled, but it felt a little forced. You okay, man? Izuku blinked a little surprised but nodded anyways. Why yeah, just some bad memories came up, you know? Denki made an agreeing hum, then did a double take on his friend's eyes. While your eyes are like blood red. He quickly pulled out his phone and put it on camera. Izuku's mouth was held open in quiet realization, but he just closed it and shrugged. I did remember a lot. But yikes, mom's going to freak. Denki put his phone down and gave Izuku a once-over. His eyes, other than the unnatural red, had a puffy and sad look to them, like he'd been crying and rubbing them. Not only that, but his shirt's hem was crumpled up like he'd been clinging to it too much, a habit he seemed to have when he was nervous. Do you want to talk about it? Izuku looked away, a small smile pulling at his cheeks. How do you always catch me? It's only been, what, a month? Denki laughed and smiled brightly at him. You're not very good at hiding it. Izuku looked offended and pouted a bit, his arms crossing. Shut up, let's just get it over with, it's kinda big. Denki nodded and off they went. Though he can't help like feeling he'd forgotten something. Aizawa sat in the teacher's lounge all Saturday, but no Midoriya Izuku's came by. He put a small reminder on a post-it note to never trust Kaminari Denki with anything important again. You seen this one yet? Some American guy flew here to sing an ABBA song. No? Izuku slid over from his Raleigh chair onto Denki's bed to see the video he was talking about. Wow, he's not half bad, he said with a lazy smile. Yeah, I can understand why it's got so many views. Denki clicked to another video about dogs and deers, and Izuku floated off to the living area to grab a snack. Midoriya, please come with me. An annoyed voice spoke out. Izuku whipped his head around, his cheeks stuffed with marshmallows that had been on the counter. Aizawa raised an eyebrow, and quickly turned, letting Izuku swallow in peace. They made their way to the teacher's side of the dorms, Izuku's indoor slippers squeaking on the cold tiled floor. I just wanted to check in with you, you've been quiet this weekend. Aizawa's dark eyes were pointed at Izuku's, but it was unlike his harsh glare, more like a soft look his mother often gave him when she was a little worried. They sat down opposite to each other on the dark brown couches. Izuku, normal again, played with his jacket's drawstrings. He was kind of worried to tell anyone about his memories. Even Denki, the guy he pretty much considered his best friend, had said it might be a bit much to tell anyone about right away. Maybe he could lay it on in smaller chunks? Who was he kidding? Aizawa would want every last detail regardless. Midoriya, Izuku looked back up to Aizawa's patient but curious eyes. I had gotten a lot of memories back at once the other day, and well, it was jarring to say the least. Aizawa blinked and Izuku continued. I remembered Bakugo Katsuki bullying me and judging me for my quirklessness. He was young, but so was I. He took a breath. I hated heroes, you know. Hated them for being so terrible and not saving enough people. I hated them for being greedy for money and popularity. Of course, there was always exceptions, but I just lost all hope. I wandered a lot after school, and sometimes I would just skip and walk aimlessly all day. Aizawa sighed but let Izuku go on. I remember stealing something, but not what. I think it was important, but I'm not sure. I felt like I could never be a hero without a quirk, so I thought I might as well give up. As in, not being around anymore. Ever. Izuku's breath stuttered and he tried not to cry again. God, he really felt helpless back then. No one could help him if he didn't reach out, and he was hellbent on being alone. Why didn't you talk to someone? You're a smart kid, Midoriya. I don't really see you as the quiet type about emotions anyways. I didn't have anyone. Izuku's eyes looked down in shame. You have your mother. But I didn't want to worry her about me. She's already been so worried ever since I'd been diagnosed. But she's the parent, Midoriya. It's her job to help you, to protect you and worry for you. I really wish you told her you weren't okay. You ever stop and think misleading her would only make her worry more? Izuku nodded no. I'm sorry you felt that bad. I've had my own hardships with suicidal thoughts before, and if you ever feel that way again, talk to someone please. Aizawa squeezed Izuku's leg. When had he reached over? When did I start crying? I'm sorry. I wanted to do terrible things to heroes. I felt like a villain. I'm so sorry. Aizawa grabbed both his shoulders and held him at arm's length, grounding him. But did you? Did you ever really hurt someone? Izuku nodded no, his nose running and eyes pouring. Thank you. I'm glad you're honest with me, it's relieving. Aizawa let go of his shoulders but had moved to sit next to Izuku instead, his form radiating a comfort Izuku only ever saw at little Kaken's house. A fatherly protective streak. Izuku could see it in Kaken's dad's eyes, always giving his son a soft smile, his brown eyes crinkled at the edges. But this was the first time Izuku ever had any kind of look directed at him, only his mother did, but it was different. His mom offered protection and love, but this gaze offered understanding. If only he told someone. Maybe his mother could offer him the same look, but not today. Today he had a father figure, even if Aizawa didn't notice it himself. Snot was dribbling down his lip at this point, and Aizawa handed him a tissue box unblinkingly. Izuku blew his nose and smiled, a soft but grateful one. While I am upset you felt the need to physically hurt others, you did not act on those thoughts, correct? You are not a villain, Midoriya. You're regretting even thinking about it, and that just proves it. He sniffled and wiped his nose with a tissue. Proves what? It proves that you're a hero. Izuku wasn't brooding. Okay, he was a little, but he is a teenager. It was hard to bounce back after sharing his memories with Aizawa and Denki. Class was over and everyone was back at the dorms again. Izuku himself was in his room, lights off, hiding under the All Might-themed comforters. His phone was the only light source and it was on the dimmest setting. Izuku used a little reading light to prop the cover up so he could see under the blanket. His head was transparent, while the rest of his body was normal. Ever since school was let out he had just been moody. It wasn't his fault, but he couldn't help but feel stupid. He knew being upset wouldn't help anything, but how could he be fine knowing he had willingly wanted to become a villain? Izuku didn't want to brag, but if he became a villain he would have totally exploited all the weaknesses in quirks, and there was plenty in most hero quirks, as well as using others for physical work while all he had to do was what he did best, analysis and planning. While most of his plans were crazier than a crackhead on, well, crack, they tended to work. Or at the very least one of them did. He still failed, he was only human after all. But that was only a hypothetical situation really. He'd never be a villain, right? Well, at least current Izuku wouldn't. He wasn't so sure about who he was before, and this only made things mudder. It was like looking through murky water during a storm at night. Impossible. What the hell was he even thinking back then? Become a villain to what? What kind of motives other than fixing a dumb system that would always be corrupted in some way would he really even have? He didn't know, so maybe those thoughts were never really acted upon. Besides that, Izuku was just upset at Bakugo for all the shit he forced him into. Not only hurting him emotionally, but physically ever since he was diagnosed. That memory never left. Izuku really wished it had. A knock at the door and Izuku slowly phased through his bedsheets to the door. Instead of opening it like a normal person though, he stuck his entire head through. What's up, Denki? AAA. His voice cracked so he cleared his throat. Jesus man. Really, stop with that? Izuku laughed at the voice crack and Denki mimicked him in a mocking fashion. Haha, I'm Izuku and I'm a big fat All Might fanboy. Shut up, I do not sound that high-pitched. He pushed Denki away with his hand on the blonde's face, his torso sticking out of the doorway. Would you two fucking nerds shut up, I'm trying to sleep, damn it. Bakugo cried from down the hall, his own door open just for his angry face to peek out and hiss at them like a pissed cat. Sorry dude. We'll be good. Denki called, opening the door to Izuku's room. Izuku flew back to his bed and plugged his phone into the wall. Yo dude, gimme. Izuku turned to Denki's open palm. You sure? Doesn't that take a lot of energy? Denki smiled. Not anymore. I've gotten better, man. Izuku unplugged the charger block and gave it to Denki, the blonde putting the metal in his mouth to charge the phone. They sat for a while enjoying each other's company. Then Denki ruined it. Hey, You wanna try that possessing thing again? Izuku looked at him confused, then remembered what he was talking about. Oh, that thing we did a while back? Denki nodded. You haven't tested it much, right? Only that one time, really? Then let's try again. Like, can you control me and my quirk? Or is it like you're along for the ride? Izuku pulled at his bottom lip thinking about it. He hasn't had a chance to try that out. And Denki was asking, so why not? Okay, but let's go to the training grounds if we're using your quirk. Denki nodded, pumping his fist in the air, then handed Izuku his phone fully charged. You're going to need supervision for anything that's this risky. I'm busy, go find Mike or maybe Midnight, Aizawa said, and he walked away from the two boys already in their gym attire. Well, let's go ask then, Denki said, moving down to the teacher's office. They found present Mike with Snipe in the office. No other teachers were there. And then the lady told me to get out. I know I'm not the nicest looking fella, but I didn't think I'd get kicked out of some old lady's place, Snipe said, sounding sort of upset. Don't beat yourself up. Oh, and what brings you two listeners? Present Mike said, turning to Denki and Izuku. Izuku was normal, so Snipe saw him as well. Aizawa told us to get a supervisor for some quirk tests we had in mind. Izuku piped up with a small grin. Present Mike smiled and stood, saying goodbye to Snipe and that he'd love to supervise. Out on the field, Izuku let go and hovered next to Denki while Present Mike got a plastic fold chair out to watch. You ready? Izuku asked. Denki gave a nod and Izuku quickly slipped in. Again, both their hands and legs seemed to be in perfect sync, even their thoughts piled up on one another. Okay, what do you want to start with first, dude? Let's see if I can activate your quirk without your help. Sure. Izuku tried. He imaged the electricity in his head, but to no avail could he summon any. He lifted Denki's fingers without both of them moving in sync and closed their eyes and tried to really feel the current running through Denki's body naturally. Need some help? Think I almost. But before he could make a spark, the ground beneath them shook and Izuku lost his grip and flew out of Denki's body. Izuku shifted back to normal and stood up, looking back to Denki, who was still on the ground. He moved over and saw that the blonde seemed to short-circuit himself on the way down, his eyes unseeing and his thumbs up showing he was all right. Present Mike was saying something and Izuku was taking a second to process what exactly it was. He gotta go. Grab Kaminari. He rushed over and quickly picked up half of Denki. Izuku rushed to pick up the other side of his friend. They quickly rushed to the main building. Mike said something about it being a shelter during an attack. Izuku turned his head to look back. What he saw would haunt him for a long time. The dorms were on fire. Everything had gone to shit. His hands felt heavy, he was panting and he had a splitting headache to boot. A loud cackle and he could feel each hair on the back of his neck rise. Izuku's eyes darted around to see his enemy and get a feel for the next attack. He turned a second too late. He got hit in the stomach by a strong kick. Crap, why can't I do it? A hand grabbed his foot from behind and dragged him down to the ground. Izuku yelped and went to snag and pry the hand off, but he got pulled under, his body phasing through everything. A few seconds of silence, then Izuku popped his head back out of the ground and laughed. Senpai, you're really hard to beat. Izuku laughed as Mirio popped out of the ground as well. His shirt was left on the ground, but he managed to keep his pants. They both went to drink some water, Izuku talking a mile per minute about how cool and awesome Mirio was. I can't believe how cool your quirk is. It's the opposite of mine kinda, because I have to go from intangible to tangible, but you don't have to worry about any of that. Mirio beamed at Izuku and they kept talking about quirks and All Might, and Mirio's costume design and name. I'm going to save 1,000,000 people, but of course that's not the end goal. I'll save more than that, of course. The blonde smiled at Izuku's short form, and he couldn't help but idolize Mirio and what he wanted to stand for. They went to get food in the cafeteria and Izuku was too embarrassed to introduce himself to any other third years. But Mirio made it happen anyways, saying something about being used to breaking shy people out of their shells. One of my best friends is super shy, so let's end with him, Mirio said as he talked to a third-year girl with light blue hair that spun down and curled at the ends. Her name was Nijire Hado, and she was very nice but a little overbearing with all her questions. After a few more third years said hello, Izuku met the very shy one Mirio mentioned, Tamaki Amajiki. He had dark hair and pointed ears similar to what elves in media were described as. He tried to make eye contact but he kept avoiding Izuku's eyes. Don't worry about him, he's always been like that. He'll warm up to you. He ran as fast as he could with the extra weight Denki provided. Present Mike had taken the lead as they made their way into the school's main building. The windows had been covered by steel doors already, and Mike had to use his teacher card to open the metal doors that had replaced the glass ones. They ran inside and found hundreds of general ed students running for cover in classrooms or trying to escape to no avail. In the distance you could still hear loud crashes and explosions from the dorms. What in the world was happening out there? Izuku laid Denki down in one A's room. Some other students in the hero course were there as well, a tall boy with dark blue hair and glasses, Ida Tenya, and the frog girl, Azuitsuyuts, were quietly panicking and both ran over to see Denki and Izuku. Mike had already ran off to help. What is happening? Ida and I were talking to Snipe and Dash. Another loud boom cut her off. They all covered their ears. That was a sonic boom. Was it All Might? Or one of the villains? There was no way this was a fire, too many explosions, and the shutdown wouldn't have happened if it was. I saw the dorms, they were on fire. I think it's an attack. He gulped for air, his entire body was transparent and his feet were inside the floor. The stress was making it very difficult to keep his physical form, but Izuku had an idea. A very reckless and stupid idea. I'm going to go check on everyone. He shouted. He was already flying out the door before anyone could object. It's not like he could be seen or hurt by anyone like this. He flew so fast that in about the blink of an eye he was above the dorms. The smoke was making it hard to see anything, so he flew down trying to find anyone who needed help. On the top floor he poked his head in to see that it wasn't on fire yet, and no one seemed to be here. He made his way to the third floor. A few students were here, mostly from 1B, a blonde boy and a boy made of steel named Tessutisu. Kirishima told him about the boy with the similar quirk from the sports festival, stood by the door leading higher up. Shit, what can we do? Monoma, you got one of their quirks right. Tessu said. He was leaning on the door that had stairs to the second floor. Izuku quickly stuck his head through to see 4 villains pushing on the other side. Without thinking, Izuku slipped into the closest male villain's body, and he punched the other 3 behind him. Before the villain could figure out he was possessed, Izuku made him jump down the stairs and quickly fled his falling body. He phased to the other side of the door and tapped both 1B students so they could see him. I took care of them, come on. He yelled and grabbed both their arms to drag them along. He led them to the roof and the blonde yanked his arm out of Izuku's grasp. Who are you? He sneered while his hand was held up defensively at Izuku. I'm a 1A student. Come on, we gotta get you to the school. Izuku tried. I've never seen you, you could be a villain for all we know. Monoma said. Seriously, Tetsuku. Kirishima goes on and on about how manly you were, and Monoma, you're kind of a jerk but your quirk is cool. Now use it on me so you can fly Tetsu out of here. Izuku touched Monoma's hand with his and Monoma went transparent. Fine, but I still don't trust you. He yelled while trying to carry the heavy steel boy to the main building. Be careful. Izuku yelled at him. After he saw they made it back, he dived down to the second floor where the most villains seemed to be. Some were digging around through the students' dorms, others looking for something, probably students. The fire seemed to be put out by someone, either Todoroki or a 1B student. Izuku zipped past most of the villains to see if he could find any students. None seemed to be on the second floor, so he dived down to the first and was greeted with a terrifying sight. Most of Class 1A was on the ground, some moving, others still hopefully passed out. Bakugo, Todoroki, Uraraka, Kirishima, and Siro were fighting wave after wave of villains. They were protecting those who had fallen, mostly Class 1A and some 1B students, and what seemed to be one Gen Ed student was still up and fighting. That Gen Ed student was Shinso, the purple-haired student he was supposed to have the internship with next week. In a second, Izuku possessed a villain with a strength-based quirk and turned to uppercut one of his colleagues in the face. The hero student seemed confused, but once he ran out a window with the body and quickly left it to fall, everyone seemed hopeful sans Bakugo, who seemed pissed, but he always seemed that way. Izuku punched a few villains out of the way if they got too close to a fallen student. He wanted to fly them all to safety, but he could only carry one or two at most. Curse his skinny arms. Izuku noticed a few villains outside. They must be the ringleaders of the attack because they were making orders. Well, more like barking orders at the new villains pouring out form a dark ominous portal. They kept coming out endlessly, it seemed. Where is All Might? Someone. Gritting his teeth, he flew out the window and stopped a few feet away from the leader. His back was turned to Izuku as he yelled at a maid who seemed to be the portal maker. He was made of the same mist, about not seeing the objective around. The mist man turned his eyes and he saw Izuku. Shigaraki, I've found the target. He spoke coolly. Shigaraki turned, his face covered by a severed hand. Only a bright red eye, just like Kaken's, was seen. But he was nothing like Kaken. There you are, spy. Shoyuta was sleeping in his office on his important, busy work when a loud crashing sound woke him. At first he thought it could be Bakugo. The kid was louder than a jackhammer on a Saturday morning, but it couldn't be simply because Bakugo didn't practice around others. He shot up, his yellow sleeping bag slid off his shoulders while he opened the blinders from the window facing the dorms, and sure enough he saw smoke lazily curling up into the sky. The dorms were on fire, and villains were coming out of a portal. His kids were in trouble. He ran. Shoyuta Aizawa must have run faster than he had in a long while. His brand new goggles were already on his face, his capture gear in both hands as he sprinted down the hallways. First he had to check and see who was already safe. In 1A he found 4 students, Ida, Kaminari, Azui, and Aoyama. All seemed to be fairly shaken, but Ida quickly told him the situation. Midoriya had taken off after him and Mike delivered Kaminari in a dazed state. Said boy was back to normal and seemed to be sweating bullets of pure worry and anxiety. While he wished he could help comfort them, he had to get the rest of his class out of there. On his way running to the dorms, God, why were they so far from the main building? He passed a few 1B students escaping and some 1A students, Yairozu, Tokoyami, Ajuru, Kuda, Shoji who was carrying a few others, and finally Todoroki who had to be held up by Kuda. Get to homeroom, all of you. I'll get the others. Aizawa rushed into the building taking down several villains as he went. Mike and Snipe were already on the scene. Midnight was upstairs and had taken out the higher levels. Nedzu radioed in saying Yagi would be there in a few minutes. All of his students were alive and Shoyuta did his best to carry as many as he could outside and ushered them to get to the main building as quickly as they could. Once he finally got Bakugo outside, his student yelled at him, "God damn it. They have him, they have fucking Deku," he kept saying. Shoyuta didn't know who the hell Deku was, but he took note to how upset he seemed. Shoyuta told him he'd find Deku and all the kid did was shake his head. Deku fucking went with them. Willingly. And besides, you can't fucking touch him, so if he wants to stay with them you can't dash. Shoyuta felt rage. Midoriya? Don't you remember? Your eyes are almost red, so you should know who I am. Shigaraki spoke. Izuku was breathing raggedly, his head hurt more than ever. And no. He grabbed his aching head and closed his eyes as it all came together for once ever since he'd woken up at the school. He remembered the deal. Ah, you finally know who I am, brat? Shigaraki Tamura spoke. All he could do was nod slowly, shocked eyes staring back at dark red ones. Finally. Come back home, why don't you? Sensei's been waiting. He flinched, but didn't leave just like before. Well, you should be able to leave now, at least through Kurojire's portal. He was clearly trying to persuade Izuku to go with them, but it didn't matter. Izuku felt so terribly torn. The deal he made. If anyone knew, he'd be hated and Denki would. Everyone would hate me again. I can't do it again. Brat, you better respond or I'll drag you back myself. Izuku felt like crying. I'll go. Shigaraki smiled. It was the second time he'd ever seen it, but just like the first it was unsettling and creepy. His cracked and dry lips peeled away for the muscles to move upward as if they'd never made the motion properly before. They probably haven't dash. The matting smile always made his spine crawl and his brain scream danger. Kurojire, said man moved away and opened a new portal. All the villains were sucked up by other warp gates as Shigaraki promised he wouldn't raid the school as long as Izuku was cooperating nicely. All he could do was nod. Hurry up, rat, he hissed at Izuku. He nodded. He went into the portal and turned his head to see a pair of red eyes looking at him. They weren't warm or kind, but he knew that look. It was the same look he saw all those years ago. Bakugo was looking at him. The same look when I fell and you ran. But it was too late for anything more to happen. The portal had closed. He was back here again. Shigaraki told him to follow, so he did. He was led to a very familiar room, the dark door looking more ominous than ever. The pale man opened it and Izuku was confronted with the silhouette of the man who had done it all, and yet, he had done nothing. Sensei stood there, his mask only covering his nose and upward. His mouth was revealed to be strangely normal, perfect white teeth shined brightly in the dim room. Welcome back, Izuku Midoriya. Katsuki was fuming. He had every right to be. His fucking loser childhood buddy had just went with the bad guys. Katsuki didn't fucking hate him as much as one would think. He only hates specific fucking parts of the nerd. Like how he continuously wanted to be friends with him just because. Even assholes with quirks didn't get to be friends with him. Yeah, sure, after he found out the asshole didn't have a quirk he was mad. But once he fell down that cliff, Katsuki hated him a lot less. He pitied the poor bastard, he seemed so weak. While he did bully him a lot through elementary and middle school, he made sure others didn't. He'd stop rumors that were totally bullshit if he could, or even yell at pricks that though they could beat him up. While he was his protector, he was also the poor asshole's aggressor. Deku was a lot of things, but determined may have been the biggest thing to define the runt. Out of all the things Deku was to Katsuki, he had to admire his fucking determination to be a hero. Because after he left, he came back with a motherfucking quirk. Not even Katsuki could do that shit, at least not in the lines of the fucking laws. Why was being nice so fucking hard? Izuku had been in his room for 2 days now, silently crying. All Might, the very man he had idolized before he even knew he was quirkless, had told him the words he had to endure every single goddamn day of his fucking life. No, you can't become hero. And that was all it took to destroy his dreams. One shitty day with one shitty quote carved into his very skull. He was done. He'd given up. We won't even give you a chance, we won't even let you touch the starting line. They never cared, did they? No one even sat and thought how it feels to be him, to be considered worthless just because he lacked a stupid quirk. Even those with dumb and useless quirks were seen as superior compared to him. He who was lacking power in a physical means was equal to zero. No one wanted to be his friend, Kakin made sure of that. It's because 0 times something still equals nothing, Deku. That's what he said to him. All he ever wanted was a friend, hell even a really lame one. He just wanted a goddamn friend, but apparently being worthless meant you didn't deserve anything. Izuku was so over this shit, his life was terrible, and he was going to high school in just 4 short months. At the very least, Kakin was no longer going to torment him in class. But there was always someone to fill the hierarchy's empty seat, wasn't there? Always a new enemy coming to kick Izuku down farther into his hole. That's all his life was, a dark hole of self-wallowing and pity for no one but himself. When did that happen? Before, at the very least, he was naive enough to smile in his times of pain. But after All Might, Izuku lost that shine of hope in his eyes. His smiles became a rare thing as his dreams slowly chipped away the longer he was taunted by others. Izuku stopped going to school one day. Instead, he went for walks until late at night, only going back home to make sure his mother didn't worry. She was the only reason he really felt the need to stay anywhere at this point. It was really late, but it was a Friday, so Izuku kept walking. His mom wasn't going to be home until Sunday, so he kept on going until he reached a shady part of town. His phone rang a few times, but he kept ignoring it in favor of walking. The only person who'd even call would be Mom checking up on him anyways. Suddenly, Izuku was in front of a man. "Hey, kid, didn't your parents ever tell you not to wander at night?" His black hoodie made it hard to see any facial features other than his long pale hair. He loomed a good head taller than Izuku. The guy's shoes were, strangely, a very matching red to his own pair. "Who are you?" Izuku said with little bite to his words. He was confused on why this stanger cared enough to warn him. He huffed in amusement, his posture went lazy, and he lifted his head enough for Izuku to see his lips pulled into a smile. A cold smile that simply screamed danger. Don't worry about that yet, let's chat. Izuku didn't like that. Come on kid, don't get cold feet, I can tell you're pissed at something. Really, Izuku was a smart kid, he had to be. But sometimes rage blinds you enough to make you impulsive. And besides, Izuku did feel the need to rant. He could spare a few minutes with some sketchy-ass guy. He'd just have to book it when the drugs came out. Come on, let's head to a more private place, I can tell you're pretty upset. The man turned to walk and Izuku hesitated for only a moment. It was probably a mistake but he went anyways. The man took him to a bar, and it was actually very clean. Kinda creepy with all the neatness, but clean. The bartender seemed to not give a shit that Izuku was obviously a minor, hell he could pass for a 12-year-old, but the mist-looking guy gave him a soft hello when he sat down next to the hooded man. Okay kid, you pissed off at something or someone? He asked casually, slouching onto the bar top like he owned the place. Thinking back he probably did. I kinda both, I wanted to be a hero but at the word hero the man twitched slightly but let Izuku go on. Sighing, Izuku went on to tell his sob story. All Might had saved me from dying a while back. But when I asked him if someone like me could even become a hero he shot me down without another thought. At the mere thought of it Izuku's face twisted into a grimace. It just wasn't fair, not that it had been from day one. The man lowered his hood fully, he had some nasty scars and dry lips, very pale skin like he'd never been out in the sun, and sharp sunken cheekbones, somebody like you? He asked meeting Izuku's eyes for the first time. They were blood red just like Kaken's. But he was nothing like Kaken. For a moment Izuku thought it'd be different this time, it wouldn't have to come down to his one fault in biology. But here he was. Quirkless, ashamed and angry, those were the only feelings he attached to the word. The man hummed but seemed to be rather pleased. Well that's easy then. Follow me. The man stood up again. He followed. They went down some stairs and a few halls. The man turned to meet Izuku's curious gaze. Come, I'll grant you a wish. He said, a real smile that was too sharp spread across his face. It was real because his eyes crinkled up, but the motion still managed to look unnatural and very out of place. Gulping, Izuku followed. Well that's not fucking ominous at all. They stopped at a door that the man quickly punched a code into and opened. He turned on the lights and ushered Izuku in while quietly closing the door behind them, several soft clicks being heard. Shit dash. Sensei, I brought a promising one. He spoke out to the dark room that seemed to slowly come to life much like a reanimated corpse. Izuku was shocked to see a man in a mask sitting in a chair surrounded by at least 20 screens. They seemed to have information from every kind of source. News articles, some channels on TV Izuku watched while analyzing heroes, even cryptic sites all about darker theories of the local heroes that he wasn't brave enough to venture to were all pulled up. The man who was sitting in front of it all had a dark mask that had what seemed to be air tanks attached to the sides. He was dressed in all black save his dark red tie, much like a businessman you would see on the train. He looked normal beyond his mask, and even his strange smile that seemed off somehow was charming in a way. He clearly knew how to please people, his body language was relaxed yet confident, his arms opened and ready to move around to explain something almost like a father would to a young child. He tilted his head to the man who brought Izuku here. He still had a smile stuck on his face, but looking closer he could see the scars trailing up his face hidden under the mask. He was acting, just like those heroes Izuku loathed so much. It felt as if someone had stepped on his grave, sharp chills rolling down his spine as he turned his head to him. State your name, this so-called sensei said. Midoriya Izuku. Even if he had lied, Izuku felt like he couldn't get away with it, at least not from this man. He could see the power coming off of him in waves. So, I hear you are quirkless, he started, his voice deep and rhythmic like a soft melody. He didn't stand, but he leaned over a bit, his hands clasping together like a butterfly fluttering its wings open. But in this situation it was more like a viper had snatched it from its perch and in its dying moments the butterfly twitched to escape. But it could not fly away. Do you desire power, Izuku? Izuku shuddered as Sensei purred out only his first name. Only his mother ever did that, Bakugo never did. But Izuku didn't have to mull it over. his answer had always yes. Wise. I can grant you a quirk with my own power all for one. Maybe more than one if you so desire, but you must make a deal with me. Izuku was nervous. These people weren't kind and probably didn't follow the law at all. But he was not backing down from this. He could have a quirk. A deal with the devil if you will, the man next to Izuku said. His grin faltered but his eyes still seemed intrigued enough in Izuku's answer. What deal do you want? Izuku asked. I desire a spy. One who could go into UA and be completely undetected. You would feed us information. As Izuku thought about it, memories of Kakin yelling at him, telling him how completely worthless he was ran through his head. His mother's tears as she thought telling him how sorry she was would make him feel better. It hurt. All of it kept building up into a tower until it tipped over and crashed. He suddenly wanted to cry, his eyes were puffy and his brain a hazy mess. Why was he so worthless? What good could someone like him do? Why be stuck thinking in the law anyways? Why not show the world if they rejected him for being useless, he'd come back and destroy them all. He'd show them all he could be strong, he was useful, he was powerful. I'll do it. After he said that, Sensei's posture calmed. When had it become so ridged? A sudden push on his own head was taken away and Izuku realized far too late that the man had used a quirk on him. The deal has been made. He stood. Izuku, I shall grant you 2 quirks for now. The first is simply known as ghost form, giving the user the ability to become a ghost and use abilities ghosts have been known to have. The second is long living, which is self-explanatory. Both of these will give you the stealth and healing you need to make it into UA, and with you being quirkless, that only means the quirks have a very high chance of mixing together and becoming even stronger than before. Izuku nodded along to the information with a new kind of determination in his hopeless eyes. Once you enter UA, you are to report to us every week. Do you accept? Izuku nodded. Yes. Sensei took a few strides forward, he towered over Izuku, and held his hand for them to shake. He stepped forward and held the man's hand only to feel his skin burn. He tried to move back but the hold was strong and the hooded man had moved to keep him still by placing a 4-fingered grip on his other arm. I shall also be confining you to UA's property to make sure you don't run off. When Sensei started pushing the first quirk into Izuku, he knew it immediately by the pure amount of pain. Izuku screamed in betrayal, but mostly because it hurt. It was like fire spreading into his veins and taking hold of his blood and bones. It was worse than Kakin's blast to his sides or arms. He'd had years' worth of burns to no one, but this was not fire. It was internal, and every pore on his skin seemed to scream for help. After a few seconds the quirk settled and all of Izuku's pain faded. Now here comes the hard part, Izuku. Ghost form is a heavy quirk to hold, but because of long living you will not die nor will you be injured during the transfer. Please try to remain calm. And yet again, before Izuku's thoughts could catch up properly, there was more pain. This time, he blacked out before it ended. I will take a few days to prepare him. But once he is ready I shall be sending him to the campus, Sensei told Tamura. The kid had passed out and his body seemed to flicker slightly, but otherwise he was just dead weight. Yes, Sensei. Tamura quickly went to throw the kid onto a bed. He noticed how his hand, the one Sensei had held, was already becoming invisible to him. Normally those with more than one quirk went numu. But it seems having a blank canvas helps to avoid that a lot better. It made sense. Putting more water into an already filled cup causes it to spill. Filling an empty cup a few times just gave you a nice glass of water. For a spy, that's exactly what they needed. Tamura was fairly proud of himself for finding such a rare NPC. Well, he was more like a pawn now. The kid was very rare in today's society. The quirkless were dying out, and the second to last generation made up about 16% of that quirkless population. The kid's generation barely had any quirkless NPCs, and by the next one it would only diminish further. Teenaged quirkless were fairly hard to come across and oh so easy to manipulate. Many villains used angry quirkless kids, telling them they'd train them or help them change the way things were, only to use them a few times then throw them away like trash. They were useful pawns, not so much as permanent players. But with Tamura it was different. This was his first time coming across such a young and broken teen, let alone a quirkless teen. It was like all the bad shit he had ever done was forgiven and the universe spat out the perfect gift. With Sensei's power, they easily used the kid as a means to test the idea. Can a quirkless person hold more than one quirk without going numu? Yes, they can. It was better than a simple mindless slave. Sometimes. But God, was this just too good? Now they'd finally have a good spy to keep tabs on those brats from UA and All Might. Fucking All Might. First he somehow stopped the Numu from the USJ raid. Then he comes in last second and almost hits Kurogiri, but thank God for Sensei. He saved them both before that bastard could hit such a powerful player. Tamura was so pissed he gave up their second raid. Each fired a few recruits he hated, Dabi and that creepy Toga, leaving some dust for Kurogiri to clean. All in all, he was so pissed he avoided the idea of a raid until this opportunity landed in his lap. After getting some info, they would be more than ready for a good raid this time. No slip-ups, no fuck-ups this time. They'd be ready for All Might and his stupid posse. This time would be the final raid on the stupid school. What Tamura didn't know was the very child he thought would lead them to victory was the reason they had broken apart at the very seams. Welcome back, Midoriya Izuku. He nodded. I hope you're still willing to provide information to us, otherwise I may have to resort to the Messier tactics. He strolled up to Izuku, who was floating an inch off the ground. Sensei went to touch his shoulder and to his surprise, it didn't phase through. His hands were cold and firm, not the hands of a caring father or mentor. These were the hands of a madman. He nodded slowly. Good. He let his predatory hand slip away and Izuku, if he could breath, let out a silent breath. Did you reveal yourself to anyone? I know you had memory issues due to the influence of your quirks, but you're a smart boy. I wouldn't think you'd break any rules of mine intentionally. He nodded, his eyes digging into the floor. Please, tell me all about 1A. He sat down on his chair, his posture calm and confident as always. Izuku didn't know where to begin, and if his mind was finally up to date, no one knew the limit of Izuku's abilities yet. All they knew was what both quirks could do separately. But they weren't separate anymore, they were a part of him now. Even if he wished he didn't steal them from their true owners, it was too late for that. He had to get out. Before Sensei could question his long silence, Izuku had moved across the room so fast nobody, not even Sensei himself, registered it until alarms started to blare. Izuku had pulled the plug on all of Sensei's medical equipment. Yells of outrage and anger were left behind and he flew out of the building, no walls stopping him. It had been Sensei to trap him in the school, so he could do so with the League's base if he didn't escape quick enough. Before he knew it, Izuku was in the stratosphere trying to calm himself down a little. While pulling the plug would stop Sensei for a minute, there was no way in hell it'd stop the man. Izuku looked around until he saw the school. From up here it looked so small, the League's base only a city away from it. When did everything become so simple? Probably when he got his quirks, but it still bothered Izuku how easily he had escaped. Even if he left, Sensei would be on the hunt for him. Not only did Izuku have good information, but he had 2 of Sensei's quirks. He'd want them back. Doing that would most likely kill Izuku, especially long-living, as it was the only thing that's saving him from dying after getting ghost form. He promised himself he wouldn't let that man take these quirks again. Not because he'd die without them, but because he did deserve any quirks he had stolen. Resolving himself, he let himself drop down back to Earth, right at UA's front gates. Nedzu saw him and let him in. Izuku had a lot of explaining to do. When he reached the principal's door, he opened it to find his mother and Kakin. I made it back, he said, but it came out as a watery whisper. Mom turned and immediately hugged him. Izuku shifted back to normal to let himself be embraced even if he wasn't exactly gone for long. Izuku, are you okay? Did they hurt you at all? His mother asked. Oh, they don't know about me being able to turn back to normal at all. He sat down, his mother at his side with her hands on Izuku's own. I know how I got my quirks. All eyes in the room turned to him. Quirks? Nedzu pressed. A man named Sensei gave them to me. He wanted me to spy on you. Kakin growled lowly and his mom's grip got tighter. But I was influenced by his own quirk, well, one of them. I made a huge mistake by going with Shigaraki. He saw me when I was alone. Izuku went on and on in detail about his side of the story, and how he was probably used for their benefit. He felt empty. Should he feel guilty? It was his fault he had gone and said yes, but no one blamed him. Mom didn't, Nedzu didn't, and even Kakin didn't. Nedzu told him he was most definitely influenced by a quirk. He'd seen who Izuku was before All Might. Izuku remembered All Might. The reason he had went into a downward spiral was because the man crushed his dreams, as sad as it sounded. It was a hopeless situation. A quirkless person wished to be a hero? Impossible. Even if All Might had good intentions, he still hurt him. The idol of his life said the one thing he'd heard his entire life: you're not enough. It led him to be vulnerable and broken, not that he had ever worked right being quirkless and all. But now it was different. Nedzu said, "You have power. You can use it for good, not for spying and prowling around like a villain. You can use them in a positive way now." But Izuku was too tired for that, so he decided he'd think about it. He left with his mom and Kakin to his room. Kakin looked lost in his own head as he slowly made his way back to his own room. Izuku and his mom talked for a few hours, plenty of tears shed as Izuku laid out his past feelings clearly for her to see. It was a mess and he was glad she was there for it. "I'm sorry." He lowered his head. It touched the cold tiled kitchen floor. All Might, the man himself, was apologizing to Izuku, who had just woken up and left his room to go grab a bite to eat, only to find the man looking tired and upset. Why, he can't take it back. Izuku thought he wanted an apology. All Might was his hero, but he'd failed him. Even if it was just words, if Izuku hadn't played his cards right, he could have died. His mother would have been devastated, and Izuku would never forgive himself for doing that to her. All Might himself looked pretty devastated at that. He lifted his head, his eyes showed all the shame. "I don't need you to forgive me, but I just want you to know I should have been more considerate and I shouldn't have shot your dreams down like the dash. It's fine. I can't say I'll ever forgive you, but I know you didn't think about it before saying it." He sighed, breathing in and letting it slowly fall out. "All Might, I could have died because of this, as stupid as it seems." He saw the man flinch at that. "But I didn't. I don't want to linger on the past anymore. I'm not the same person as him, Ami. I'm Midoriya Izuku, and I say drop it, please." All Might looked so lost, it felt like the damn roles had been swapped. And to further prove he wanted nothing to do with the man any longer, Izuku turned and walked away. Toshinori didn't know what to do. It really was his fault, he thought. The boy had given up hope, and it was all his damn fault. He really wished he would think before he spoke, because he had ruined a 14-year-old child. Aizawa's words, as monotone and harsh as they could be, were thousands of times better than whatever motivational crap he could think of. While it was a little harsh to put all the blame on his one encounter with a 14-year-old, it still was the roots of the poor boy's life spiraling out of control. Into the talons of all for one of all monsters. This was not something that could be forgiven easily. At the end of the day, Izuku was already at Denki's room, crying his eyes out and saying sorry. Aizawa and him had a very, very long talk about not going off with strangers, and at the same time worried glances with apologies from both sides. It was a sad day and he was just tired. Mom had hugged him for nearly an hour, and that was only after the worried sobbing. He felt really bad for making her so scared, but no matter what he did, he had a quirk or quirks now, and he had no idea what to do with that knowledge of how he got them. Izuku couldn't find it in himself to fully forgive All Might, but he never hated him. He didn't know what Izuku was going through. How could he? It wasn't his fault. This was all on his shoulders. He never got to forgive the man, but he still kept the collection. Back in Denki's room, said Blonde asked him something a few days later. "What now? Are you going to move back into your mom's now that you can leave?" He turned in his swivel chair to look at the floating Izuku, who was upside down, his eyes bright red with green rings. It was simply part of the ghost quirk he had, according to Recovery Girl. Izuku had been worried All for One was spying through his own eyes like a camera, but it was just a side effect. Hopefully. I'm not sure. Denki titled his head. "So you're not moving back?" "No, I meant I'm not sure about what to do with my life now. I'm enrolled in a hero school, but I don't deserve to be here, do I?" Denki shook his head and smiled. "Dude, you're the coolest hero already. You might have had Not the coolest intentions at first, but you're back on the good side, right? He stood. Doesn't that count? You're here, it doesn't really matter how you got here, it's the fact that you want to be a good person and a hero. Izuku let a snort out. I think it still matters how I got here, but I see your point. He floated in lazy circles above Denki thinking about it. It was true, he might have wormed his way into the school, but the teachers seemed to be fine with him, and Nedzu told him the other day it was perfectly fine with him if he wished to stay. You know what? He stood in midair. You're right, Denki, I'm going to be a hero. He smiled without a care in the world. I'll become a hero. Denki could only smile.